Chapter 2603. He was really happy that she thought he was good-looking. Wei Wei Bai's face was illuminated by the golden light, so gentle that it was almost illusory. Her voice gradually dissipated. If I met you earlier, maybe I would love. Her voice weakened. Wei Wei Bai finally closed her eyes slowly, the resentment of the curse corroding her body. All the resentment of the previous royal family, the curse of the evil spirits, entangled a person with such weak magic power. Her body couldn't hold on. Xiaya hugged her, her hair fell under his fingers, the youth's eyes were red and ferocious. The crowd rushed over, wanting to pull Wei Wei Bai away. Wei Wei Bai, who only had one breath left, if she was pulled away, she would really die. Xiaya hugged her in a daze. As for the magic array, it began to be constructed, entering the final stage of formation. A majestic life force began to spread. Xiaya could only feel her skin gradually turning cold. Her heartbeat also began to slow down. This curse was for him. His physical fitness could withstand it, and he even had the power of the holy dragon. He could resist any curse, any evil spirit invasion. So he completely ignored these little tricks. He thought that he could control the situation. That's why he allowed the old king to cast such a vicious curse, and even planned to expose her identity on a small scale. Because it was only exposed in the noble circle. He could suppress public opinion, and no one dared to talk about her. It was natural that she didn't like him. He used all kinds of methods, and in the end, he caused her to be so miserable. How could he have the face to let her like him? When someone began to touch Wei Wei Bai's arm, Xiaya suddenly raised his head. His purple eyes were ferocious and ruthless. Who gave you the guts to touch her? If this continent couldn't tolerate her, then he would destroy this continent. If the people here attacked and hurt her, then he would slaughter all the people who hurt her. All the mistakes started with him, then he would solve them one by one. The youth's bone-chilling voice slowly sounded, the dragon language chant was gorgeous and elegant, but also terrifying and ancient. Scorching heat suddenly rose. All the fingers that reached over turned into ashes. Light magic, dragon magic, under the ancient chant. Everyone who walked into them was attacked indiscriminately. Nobles, commoners, and grand magicians. None of them could escape Xiaya's angry killing intent. More than half of his power surged into Wei Wei Bai's body, expelling the terrifying black gas. Many of the mages and nobles present immediately fled. Everyone ran out of the door in fear. Above the hall, a massive healing magic array and an offensive magic array intertwined. The pattern was so complex that it had never been seen before. Many great mages looked at it in shock. Xiaya's magic had already reached the realm of God. Some of the half-step legendary mages slowly sat on the ground. He had lost all will to fight. Meanwhile, the people who had been corroded by the black gas were also shaken awake by the huge magical aura. Everyone stared blankly at the ceiling of the hall. The magic arrays continued to assemble, enveloping the entire hall. Holy and magnificent light shone. This was a shocking scene created by the great holy magician sacrificing his life force. Wei Wei Bai thought that she would be able to get a favorability of 100 before she died. In the end, Xiaya was a miser. She endured until the last moment. She didn't hear the sound of the favorability increasing. She simply couldn't die in peace. Chapter 2604. The main mission was not completed. She was busy for nothing. Fortunately, it was completed. At least her face was fine. She thought that she could directly die and return to the real world. After all, she and the system had read the information about that curse. That was vicious, that one would die without a doubt if they were infected. Many lives of the royal family and nobles were sacrificed. This curse was 24K pure gold, super VIP, and a high-grade item with unlimited supply of black cards. Although it could only cause a little trouble for Xiaya. But if it was directly thrown on an ordinary person, they would directly turn into a pool of blood. After all, they would die if they couldn't withstand the curse's dark aura. At most, she had a little bit of magic ability, plus her soul was in an external space. This caused the darkness to flow into the body faster. So, it was actually easier to die than ordinary people. Not to mention dying, if it was someone else, they would probably still be followed by this curse in their next life. Continue to die. He would die from generation to generation. Until the curse's dark aura was worn out and exhausted. Wei Wei Bai also relied on the system to purify her. When she directly returned to the real world, she could get rid of the curse. So, she dared to take the risk. Otherwise, who would be willing to die a horrible death every life? How many times did she die a horrible death? She was really tired of dying. But after paying such a huge price, she still held on to her pride and blurted out the confession that was most fitting for her character. Unexpectedly, the favorability didn't increase at all before she closed her eyes. Xiaya wished. You scumbag. Wei Wei Bai fiercely scolded, and excitedly opened her eyes. Beautiful and gorgeous decorations, a Western-style classical bed. There was also a magic light, and a fire in the fireplace was burning. Wei Wei Bai, this is Rose Castle. Wei Wei Bai was just about to call the system when she saw Xiaya sitting on the recliner beside the bed, quietly sleeping with his eyes closed. His beautiful face was a little pale, and his lips were a lot lighter. His honey-colored curly hair was a little long, falling under his eyes, drawing a beautiful shadow. The rose-colored youth was still gorgeous, but there was a hint of tranquility. The system's voice also sounded awake. You have been sleeping for a month, and your favorability is full. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but smile. She knew that the effect of risking his life would definitely not be bad. It turned out that Xiaya was too slow and waited until she fainted before his favorability was full. Wei Wei Bai was puzzled. I didn't return to the real world directly. The system said, don't force it back. I was going to take your soul back, but because the magic circle was too strong, your soul was forced back into your body. Wei Wei Bai was still in a daze. If that's the case, let's go now. The system looked at its naive host and finally sighed. After your soul was suppressed, the male lead was afraid that you would die, so he directly used a life contract to bind your lifespan to him. This was the most ancient magic of the dragon race. Sharing life with the other half. This was because dragons had very long lives and were very loyal. If they all fell in love with someone of the same race, it wouldn't be a big deal for them to have the same lifespan. However, some dragons would fall in love with other creatures. That was why the ancient life contract magic existed. At the last moment, Xiaya forcibly imprinted this powerful and terrifying magic onto the host. The system was also dumbfounded. Because, after being bound, the host couldn't leave. The original plan was 100 years, but because of this magic contract, it was automatically updated. 100 years became the male lead's lifespan limit. Unless Xiaya died, the host couldn't leave. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com. Chapter 2605. Wei Wei Bai listened to the system's detailed explanation. She fell into deep silence. Then she asked an important question: how long is Xiaoya's lifespan? The system flipped through the information: the higher the level of a mage, the longer their lifespan. A mage of the male leads level can probably live for a few hundred years. Wei Wei Bai, she was about to spit out blood. Wei Wei Bai tried to say, how about I stab him to death now, let's go. The system: host, are you still human? He just shared his lifespan with you, and you're full of affection, so you stab him with a knife. The system felt that its host could always cross the bottom line of human morality. Every day, it refreshed the bottom line of its worldview. It was afraid that it would pervert its beautiful heart if it were to associate with her. The system: you can't. Wei Wei Bai, why, are there any rules? The system: you can't beat him. A normal person had to fight a divine great mage, and one with dragon powers. Even if the mage was lying still, it would be uncomfortable for others to stab him with a knife. Because of the power of the dragon, the male lead's skin was as thick as an iron wall. Bullets couldn't penetrate it, so why would he be afraid of a knife? This reason was too strong. Wei Wei Bai felt hopeless. It was true. The difference in strength was too great. Even if he was lying still, she couldn't kill him. Just as Wei Wei Bai was in despair that she would have to stay for a few hundred years. A hand gently fell on her hair, the fingertips gently stroking her hair that had lost its luster. The young man, who was still in deep sleep, was already kneeling on the bed with one hand by her ear. It was as if he was holding her captive in an embrace. His purple eyes were filled with ecstasy. Wei Wei, you're awake. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly for a while. She wanted to say something, but found that her lips and tongue were dry. Xiaya immediately reached out and placed his fingertips on her lips. The power of life moistened her lips and tongue. The fatigue and after effects of a month's sleep all disappeared. In Wei Wei Bai's gloomy eyes, there was a trace of life. Xiaya breathed a sigh of relief. His beautiful fingertips fell on her face and gently touched the corners of her eyes. It's good that you're okay. At the very last moment, he had tried everything in his power and finally succeeded. A smile finally appeared on his face. Her smile was as beautiful as countless roses blooming in the snow. The rosy red stained his cheeks and the corners of his eyes. In her purple eyes, there was only clear joy. Wei Wei Bai felt like her eyes were going blurry. After laughing, Xiaya sighed and said, I want to kiss you. Wei Wei Bai, she didn't respond, but the young man didn't care. He lowered his head and kissed her. In her hand, she held a small, white, curved blade. Other than the fact that it was white, the knife was very ordinary. Xiaya stared at her deeply. The joy in his eyes hadn't faded, but there was a trace of sorrow. He said with a smile, I've been waiting for you to wake up and judge me. From the moment I met you, it was the beginning of a lie. He kept lying to her. He hurt her. He used all his schemes to get her. He knew that her enemy was actually him. Her little baron and her mother were killed because of him. He covered up all the ugly truths and put her in extreme danger. When her skin began to cool in his arms, he didn't resent some old king. He resented himself. Why did he indulge his desires and let danger appear that shouldn't have appeared? When everyone scolded her and hurt her, he hated himself. To let the Church of Light expand quickly, he slaughtered all the witches and spread the news that all witches were evil. Xiaya's tone was calm. Wei Wei, your enemy is me. This knife can kill me. He had already changed the life contract they signed. Even if he died, she could continue to enjoy his life. So, my existence will only hurt you, so kill me. By Wei Wei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. The comma. Chapter 2606. Just as she was thinking about how to stab him to death, the target automatically gave her a knife. Wei Wei Bai almost reflexively stabbed him to death. But when she met Xiaoya's calm and tragic eyes, her fingertips trembled and she didn't immediately take action. Xiaoya's snow-white fingertips held the back of her hand, his tone was still indifferent. After killing me, someone will arrange a new identity for you. Your witch mark has been completely removed when we exchanged lives, so no one will know that you are a witch in the future. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly, as if she still couldn't come back to her senses. She pursed her lips, but couldn't say anything. Xiaoya didn't mind, and began to meticulously talk about the future arrangements. The location of the dragon's treasure. The number of mages who would protect her. All the guarantees for her future life. The prosperity and beauty of the place where she would live. Everything, he had already used up everything to arrange any escape route for her, any beautiful life. Everything a man could give. He gave it all. Xiaoya's thick butterfly-like eyelashes drooped down, his violet eyes deep and rich. The knife in the girl's hand touched his chest, and the sun shone in. The scene was warm and strange. The youth's gentle eyes seemed to have settled the most amazing feelings of time, and his calm words hid a strong and deep love. His voice was soft and calm. So, you can kill me. He was so sincere, so remorseful and remorseful. Wei Wei Bai finally seemed to come back to her senses. She slowly blinked, her eyes covered with a layer of mist. My mother was killed by you. Xiaoya stiffened, but still nodded. The order to exterminate the witches was planned and carried out by him. Even if he didn't kill her mother with his own hands, he was the real instigator. Wei Wei Bai's face was even paler, and her voice was trembling. Xiaoya, was it you who killed her? This Xiaoya is the little baron. He paused, then gently shook his head. I may have indirectly killed him. He died because of your witch identity, and the law that you must die for your witch identity was set by me. Everything was over. Xiaoya's heart felt empty. It was impossible between him and her. It was impossible for her to like him. It was impossible for her to be with him. It was also impossible for her to fall in love with him after spending a long time together in the future. Because he was not worthy. Her misery, pain, and despair were all his fault. Even if he hadn't been so resolute and ruthless when he had laid down the rules to exterminate the witches back then, she would not have ended up in such a miserable state today. When Xiaoya said these words, the calmness in his eyes finally shattered. The youth's fragile side could not be hidden. His thin lips trembled as he looked at her, his eyes red. It was because he knew that she would never forgive him that he would rather die in her hands and let her go. Otherwise, he really wouldn't be able to let go. Wei Wei Bai's fingers tightened around the knife, loosening and tightening, tightening and loosening. In the end, her fingers loosened, and the knife almost fell out. Xiaoya caught him and held the knife tightly, asking anxiously, "Are you afraid to kill? Why don't I just commit suicide?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him, speechless. She said to the system, "This is the first time I've seen a target so eager to die." The system said, "Could it be that he was so scared that he decided to end it once and for all because he had to spend a few hundred years with you?" Wei Wei Bai, the system had never said anything reasonable, so she should not blame it. This plastic friendship was still so wonderful, //. Chapter 2607. Wei Wei Bai sighed, I really don't want to stay for so many years. Because it's too long and too boring. When the system thought she was going to stab the male lead to death, she pushed him away. She reached out and pushed Xiaya away, a trace of firm indifference appearing on her pale and delicate face. No, I don't want you to die. Saying that, she got off the bed. Then she began to put on her coat. The girl's slender waist was bound by a belt. Her long hair draped over her back. Although it was dry, it was still as beautiful as a waterfall. Xiaya stared at her blankly. Holding the knife, his heart surged with wild hope. You don't want me to die. Wei Bai was silent for a moment before turning around and saying, No, I'm returning it to you. Returning it to you for saving me so many times. The meaning of this sentence was so obvious. Xiaya stared at her without blinking and finally said, But those were all lies. He didn't finish his sentence. Wei Bai glanced sideways at him. The girl's eyes were so clear that he could see the bottom. There was no resentment, no killing intent. There was only a shallow pool of beautiful light, as smooth as honey water. Her voice was gentle and calm. I know you really saved me. Thank you, Xiaya. I forgive you. This sentence was undoubtedly the greatest salvation for a person on the verge of death. The knife in Xiaya's fingers fell to the ground. The white bone knife. When it fell to the ground, it made a crisp sound. Just when he thought that their relationship could return to how it was before. But he heard the girl's indifferent voice, without a trace of emotion. But the people I love, my mother died because of you. Although I forgive you, I can't forgive myself for truly being friends with you. Her voice was low and gentle. But it was even more heart-wrenching than the knife. So let's not meet in the future. Let's pretend that we never met. I'm still that poor and happy witch, and you can continue to be the honorable duke. No, His Majesty the King. After saying that, Wei Bai turned around, lifted her skirt, bent her knees, and made a lady's bow. Then she walked out. Behind him, Xiaya suddenly shouted in a low voice. Wei, don't go. The misery and frailty in his words almost made one's heart break. However, Wei Bai did not turn back and walked out resolutely. Once he was out of the door. The system then asked, Why didn't you stab him to death? Wei Bai narrowed her eyes. No one wants to commit suicide for no reason. I'm worried that he'll regret it when I stab him to death. A pervert like Xiaya has so many tricks up his sleeve. What if he went back on his word and stabbed her in the back? Why does the host have such a dark conspiracy theory? Wouldn't most people think that the other party was sincere in their repentance? As expected of a black-hearted and vicious person. Was his brain filled with such terrible things? Wei Bai, this little bastard must think that I'm going to kill him. Then, he'll tie me up and fuck me with a pained expression. After all, this guy has such a heavy taste. How can he feel pity for himself? It doesn't make sense. The system said, maybe he was mesmerized by your beauty and felt that he couldn't forgive himself for hurting you. Wei Bai held her face in shock. That's right. Why didn't I think of that? Ah! The favorability had already reached 100 points, yet the host was still doubting her influence on the male lead. If they were suspicious, then so be it. Why was he so infatuated and confident in his own appearance? Wasn't this confidence misplaced? Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here, crossover system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 2608. Wei Bai suddenly said, can Xiaya really live for a few hundred years? The system said, usually, this kind of mage has such a long lifespan. Wei Wei Bai silently opened her palm, and a life mark appeared. It was very long. This was the lifespan that Xiaya gave her. The system looked and did some calculations. 100 years. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying, this is the life-sharing contracts line, but Xiaoya's is much shorter than mine. The life-sharing contract was modified. Xiaoya gave her a large amount of life force. He only took a small part of it. She had some common sense as a witch, so when she saw the line, she did some calculations and found that this was an unreasonable way to distribute lifespan. Because the male lead's information was missing, and because she couldn't see his status. The system didn't know this. He heard Wei Wei Bai whisper to herself. I guess he won't live for a few years. His way of saving her was to sacrifice everything he had. To ensure her safety and happiness for the rest of her life. When the system heard this, it felt sad. So did the host think that the male lead was too pitiful, so she didn't kill him out of sympathy. Instead, she planned to accompany him for a few years. Then he heard Wei Wei Bai say softly, it's okay to stay for a few more years. The system nodded, he's so pitiful, it's okay to accompany him. Wei Wei Bai said, there are dragons, treasures, mountains of gold and silver, and mages and whatnot here, it'll be cool to enjoy a few more years as a tourist experience. The system was moved to tears. Wei Wei Bai said, just now, after getting rid of the troublesome target, I can play freely for a few more years before going back. After all, once Xiaya dies, she can die too. She can kill herself then. The system, Wei Wei Bai noticed the silent system, what's wrong? The system was silent for a long time before saying, nothing. Even though he was moved, he was still an idiot. Didn't I say that I won't be moved anymore? How many times did I have to be hurt before I can recognize the fact that the host is not human? Fuck your heartache. Wei Wei Bai returned to her old house. The house looked shabbier and smaller. After all, he was used to seeing Xiaoya's castle. Suddenly coming back would definitely make the house feel more cramped. However, Wei Wei Bai did not mind. She cleaned for a day and then stayed in a clean house. She sat by the window, watching the sunset and drinking honey water. Life was unusually peaceful. In the evening, she lit the fire in the fireplace and read the most popular romance novel about the overbearing duke who fell in love with the little witch. Ever since the matter between her and Xiaya had spread throughout the entire mainland. Stories about the two of them were everywhere. It was very exciting, very melodramatic, and very romantic. Wei Wei Bai laughed as she watched. She felt that the story was quite interesting. There were no side quests or main quests. She was light and carefree. When Wei Wei Bai went to bed, a figure sat quietly at the door of the house. His ear was leaning against the door, his hair was messy, and his lips were tightly pursed in the dark. Loneliness and sorrow. It made the delicate boy look very pitiful. He reached out, wanting to draw a magic circle to enter the house. But his fingertips paused and he retracted his hand. Xiaya looked at the lifeline in his palm. It was only 3 years. He used all of his life force to drag her soul back regardless of the consequences. At that time, he almost healed her. But he found that her soul was about to leave. Chapter 2609. At that time, his mind was blank. He tried his best to save her. A power that didn't belong to this world suppressed his ability with disdain. To keep her soul, he risked his life. It didn't matter if he signed a contract with the devil. His only goal was to keep her. In the end, it was for her to live a peaceful life. Xiaya stared blankly at his palm with his purple eyes. Then, he slowly clenched his fist. His time was too short. He couldn't accompany her forever. If he didn't let her go and made her fall in love with him, then what would she do when he died? Xiaya pursed his pale lips. He hugged his knees and buried his head in his thighs. In the dark night, he was trembling badly. He couldn't be selfish anymore. He couldn't give her eternal happiness. It was better to leave on his own accord from the beginning or even kill himself so that she would have no worries. So, he couldn't go in. He couldn't. The door suddenly opened and light shone out. Xiaya's figure was elongated. Xiaya was stunned. He didn't dare to move or even raise his head. His vigilance was so weak that he even heard her footsteps when she opened the door. Behind him, the girl didn't say anything. She stood while he squatted with his back to her. There was a silent silence between the two of them. Then, Xiaya heard the door slowly close again. He was stiff for a long time before he raised his head and turned around. However, she saw a stack of thick quilts beside her. Xiaya looked down for a long time before he wrapped the blanket around himself. Then, he suddenly felt that everything was warm. The little witch's life was very peaceful and smooth. No one recognized her as the evil witch who made the Duke give up the throne and brought disaster to the country. Yes, because of that incident, Xiaya. She didn't forgive all the members of the Rose family who looked on coldly. She had already cut ties with the family and said that she would not take on any royal affairs. She even refused to succeed the throne. All of this made the love story between Xiaya and the witch spread even further. She could pick up money wherever she went. She could buy the best and cheapest things when she went shopping. There were even lottery benefits that automatically came to her door. Wei Wei Bai didn't really care. She just took what she needed. Occasionally, he would say that he wanted to see the polar light. The next day, he won the special prize of the restaurant's centennial celebration, a trip to the polar region. He served the royal family the entire time. Later, she felt that it was not enough to see the polar regions, so she ran around and said that she wanted to see the dark mountain where the magicians were. Those magicians were not to be trifled with, so they did not come out. Most people couldn't see them at all. As a result, she went to the extremely dangerous dark mountain range. A bunch of amiable legendary sorcerers were standing at the entrance of the mountain, welcoming her respectfully. Wei Wei Bai expressed that this traveling life was really relaxing. Later, she expressed that she wanted to ride a dragon and see the mountain of gold coins. A steward of Rose Castle fell at her feet with a bitter face. Then he stood up on his own and thanked her profusely. He said that she had saved him. Therefore, to express his gratitude, he wanted to give her his family's dragon. There was also a mountain range of gold coins. Wei Wei Bai, do you think that with a white beard, I won't recognize you as Xiaya's steward? Then she raised her head and saw a silver dragon, timidly clinging to a rock, looking at her with pitiful and wet eyes. Its tail was flapping. Its purple eyes were filled with fragile desire. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before walking over. The silver dragon immediately lay on the ground, staring at her with its big round eyes. Wei Wei Bai climbed onto its back. The silver dragon let out a happy cry and then flew into the sky. It flew past the clouds, mountains, rivers, and earth. Finally, it came to the place where the ancient dragon hid the treasure and flew directly into the familiar cave. Countless gold coins rained down. Her body was covered with a transparent protective shield. The golden rain was gorgeous in the dragon's flight. It flew. Wei Wei Bai sat on the dragon's back and touched its neck with both hands. Very beautiful, she whispered. The silver dragon only felt that it was complete. When I first saw you turn from bones into a human, I thought you were very beautiful. So did he. When he saw her for the first time, he also thought she was very beautiful. So beautiful that it made people's hearts beat. Chapter 26:10. Wei Wei Bai stayed in this world for 5 years. During those 5 years, that dragon thought of ways to create coincidental encounters every day. The most ruthless times were when he became her next-door neighbor. Using transformation magic, he turned himself into a delicate girl and then thought of ways to make friends. Wei Wei Bai in the system looked at the target every day, wearing a dress, making orchid fingers, and calling out, little sister, in a coquettish voice. It was an indescribable experience. It was really funny. Later, when he was exposed, Xiaya became an old woman selling vegetables and thought of ways to sell vegetables to her at a lower price every day. He also always held her hand and said that she was like his dead daughter. How about you be my goddaughter? Wei Wei Bai, fuck you. So she exposed him mercilessly. He immediately took the old vegetable basket and ran away. Later, he became a lazy cat and lazed on her window every day. Then, she fed him salted fish every day. She even made the salted fish herself. Later, he collapsed from diarrhea and could only go back to the castle to lie down. The last time he came to her house, the delicate young man was still as beautiful as before after a few years of experience. He was even gentler. Hugging a bunch of red roses in her arms, she looked like an adorable little cutie. Her smile was exceptionally bright. It's windy and rainy outside, I'll come in and hide for a while, okay? Wei Wei Bai looked at him calmly with cold eyes for a long time before she turned and said, come in, we'll leave when the rain stops. Xiaya came in happily. She was knitting a sweater, one stitch at a time, and it was very beautiful. The firelight by the fireplace reflected the girl's snow-white face, looking very pure. Xiaya was like the master, without a trace of awkwardness. He took a book for himself, lay on the recliner, and read quietly. He didn't turn the pages from beginning to end. He just quietly stared at her side profile through the gaps between the pages. It was windy and rainy outside. The old house was warm, but it was unusually peaceful. When the rain slowed down, the young man suddenly said in a low voice, "Can I have a cup of hot tea?" Wei Wei Bai paused, then she looked up at him. However, she only saw his beautiful violet eyes, which reflected her shadow, gentle and affectionate. A teenager who thought he would die in 3 years. It had been 5 years since he had managed to hold on. He wondered what kind of price he would have to pay to snatch his lifespan from the hands of the Grim Reaper. There were countless hidden red veins on his skin. It was a wound that had been sewn back together with healing magic. There were too many wounds, too deep, too tragic. Therefore, the healing magic, which had always left no traces behind, could not make him feel better. Wei Wei Bai got up and walked slowly to the kitchen. Only when Shea heard her footsteps enter did he put down his book. Then, he reached out and took out a piece of paper and placed it on the table. The rain outside the window also stopped with a light and lazy snap of his fingers. Specks of light began to appear on the boy's body. Her beautiful fingers, delicate face, and beautiful eyes all became illusory. The recliner creaked as the young man's body gradually dissipated. Countless specks of light were as gorgeous as the rain of gold coins. He loved her. He loved her so much that he burned everything he had, just to give her everything that was beautiful and brilliant. Unfortunately, his body couldn't take it anymore. The boy smiled. It was okay. She didn't love him. Therefore, she wouldn't be too sad and wouldn't know about his death. She thought that he had left because he was tired of this game. She would forget about him in the future. Chapter 26:11. Forget a man who clumsily loved her, but clumsily hid his love. Wei Wei Bai walked out of the kitchen. There were golden spots of light in the air. Hidden in the light, they were almost invisible. She stared at these spots of light for a long time. She walked to the table and saw what was written on the paper. The rain stopped. I'm leaving. Wei Wei Bai silently picked up the teacup and took a sip quietly. Then she whispered, let's go back, Tongzi. Actually, she just wanted to play for 2 or 3 years. She didn't expect to stay until the 5th year. Maybe he was too fun. That was why she accidentally stayed for so long. Then she looked at the sweater that was knitted. It was a man's sweater. After 5 years, her cooking skills were still terrible. But her knitting skills were very good. It was a good gain. The system grew a little taller. It was well nourished, and its work and rest were normal. From time to time, it would watch the funny performance of a crossdresser with the host. It grew from 5 or 6 years old to 7 or 8 years old. The system wore a red festive cotton-padded jacket that no one wanted after the new year. It frowned bitterly and followed Yi Yuxuan forward. The path of space was extremely bright. There was no need to worry about any hidden weapons or storms. Because the big boss was blocking. As long as it followed, nothing would happen. It wasn't its business if something happened. It ran forward with short arms and legs. The red cotton-padded jacket fitted well and finally wouldn't let it fall. The big boss in front carefully held its Wei Wei dumpling. The ball of light in his soul had become much brighter and firmer. Yi Yuxuan gently lowered his eyes. His golden eyes were gentle and illusory with love. He stared at the sleeping little Wei Wei who was curled up and sleeping peacefully in the soul light ball. There was no pain or anger like the last time he left the plane. He had a serene expression on his face. His heart was also unusually calm. Just like when he left the plane, he was full of blessings and love for the person he loved. But there was no resentment at all. He had worked hard to the limit and gave her everything he could. Although she left immediately afterward. But he felt very satisfied. At least she was willing to accompany him for the last 5 years of his life. Yi Yuxuan walked to the edge of reality. Not far away, a faint barrier of light appeared. On the other side of the barrier were countless bones. It was the cold and vast territory of the golden-eyed man. Yi Yuxuan's calm and gentle eyes turned cold. He was even on guard. The red line on Wei Wei Bai's wrist gradually tightened. A glimmer of light appeared in the lifeless eyes of the man sitting on the throne of bones. It was as if he had waited for thousands of years and finally found what he had been waiting for. Although all the reactions had turned into fossils. However, he was still slow to show signs of pleasant surprise. The king with a pair of deathly still golden eyes moved his finger. The red line tightened even more. He had to drag the person he wanted to see into this place at any time. But in the next moment, the power at his fingertips disappeared. The only fluctuation in his emotions was because he had lost the person he was guiding with the red string. It began to become calm again, deathly still, and finally returned to an empty coldness without sorrow or joy. The system was so scared that it broke out in cold sweat. He had already returned to reality. Just now, Yi Yuxuan raised his hand, grabbed the red line, and dissolved the huge pulling force. Then, he stepped into the door of reality recklessly. The finger of his soul was already injured. // Chapter 26:12. Although it could be healed. But the pain of the soul could not be avoided by any means. Therefore, the pain was truly unbearable. Even if it was just a wound on the palm. It was 1,000,000 times more painful than a physical injury in the real world. But Yi Yuxuan's face was still calm. His thin lips, when he was hurt, only pressed tightly together. After that, he did not say anything else. The system watched as Yi Yuxuan bent down and put the soul into the sleeping body on the bed. Then Yi Yuxuan turned around and looked at him indifferently. "Take care of her." His tone was as if he was ordering a servant. System, he had his own pride. Such a casual tone, such a casual attitude. "You don't want to give me face, do you?" He said fiercely. "Okay, I will definitely protect her. I will do my best." Yi Yuxuan didn't even give him the slightest bit of attention. He passed through the wall and disappeared. The system expressed that he did not even look at him before leaving. This attitude was very good. After all, the gaze that the male lead gave him, it was not filled with murderous intent. It was just extremely cold. Or more terrifyingly, he was thinking about how to kill him. Such a terrifying gaze did not appear again. He felt that his sincere attitude moved the male lead. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes moved. She rubbed her temples with effort. She slept too deeply. When she was about to wake up, she was extremely tired. She opened her eyes. Did something happen at home? Although 5 years had passed, after some vague processing, the feelings had faded. The after effects had lessened a lot. Compared to a lifetime, this after effect was enough to cause a lot of trouble. That was why Wei Wei Bai still remembered the scene when she hugged Yi Yuxuan and coaxed him to sleep. Was Yi Yuxuan's insomnia better? The system said, "Nothing much, just that your Xian woke up after a few hours of sleep and went to work. When she came back, she continued hugging you to sleep." This was repeated a few times. In the previous world, although the male lead followed her. However, his body in the real world still retained enough consciousness. Therefore, he was able to wake up in the real world, but after sleeping, he could return to the plane. Such an ability, such a heaven-defying ability. He had only been in this plane a few times, and he had actually learned it on his own. The system expressed that this was the world of the big bosses. He had knelt until his kneecaps were broken, and he had even accidentally broken his toes. Wei Wei Bai listened to Yi Yuxuan's work and rest during this period. He found that the insomniac had indeed fallen asleep after being hugged by her. He didn't take any sleeping pills either. Qin Qiu was no longer convulsing. Therefore, the house was peaceful and quiet. It was so beautiful. Wei Wei Bai said as she stood up. Her long hair was messy and fluffy. She reached out and rubbed her face. Her sleepy look made her look as cute as a cat. Feeling like she didn't have much energy, Bai Weiwei lazily thought. She went out in her slippers. Yi Yuxuan had just opened the door and walked in. The man's slender figure was elongated by the sunlight. In her hazy state, Bai Weiwei seemed to see a familiar figure in a trance. But soon, Yi Yuxuan's handsome and flawless face appeared in front of her eyes. Wei Wei Bai blinked and didn't wait for any reaction. Yi Yuxuan had already put down the bag in his hand, and then walked over. He held her face in his hands and lowered his head. The next second, he pressed his forehead against hers. The temperature on his forehead was contagious. His eyelashes, which were close at hand, trembled slightly. Wei Wei Bai's breath stopped, and her eyes widened slightly. But Yi Yuxuan frowned. The temperature is still a little high. And read the at https://m sashu. COMT. Chapter 26:13. After saying that, he sent her to the soft sofa, then pulled the blanket over and wrapped her up. He had just gone out to buy medicine. She happened to have a fever. When he hugged her soul, he felt that her temperature was a little high. He didn't expect that when he returned to reality, he would notice that she had a fever. He also saw that the blanket was only covering her stomach. Because he was in a deep sleep for an indeterminate amount of time. As a result, he couldn't take care of her for a period of time. He made her catch a cold. Although every time she returned from the plane, her physique would strengthen. But this strengthening didn't mean that she was exceptionally powerful. After all, her body used to be on the verge of death. Now, she couldn't compare to a real ordinary person. If she didn't guard and protect her well, she might get sick. To make sure that she was fine, old Mother Yi was worried sick. He poured water and held cold medicine in his other hand. Then he bent down and handed the water to her. Wei Wei Bai took it lazily. She was mentally ill. Then he handed over the cold medicine in his hand. There weren't many cold medicines, only 3. They were all prepared medicines, expensive and effective. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be sleepwalking. She lowered her head, opened her mouth, and put the pill into her mouth. Then, she casually drank a mouthful of water and swallowed the pill. But Yi Yuxuan only felt the palm of his hand warm up, as if something had touched him. It was a refreshing feeling that made his hair stand on end, making him sluggish for a while. Then he stood up straight as if nothing had happened. After taking the medicine, Wei Wei Bai lay on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, and narrowed her eyes. She had a fever. Because she had experienced too many things, she was very slow to react to some less important identities. After all, the pain of a fever. It really wasn't painful at all. She just felt that her brain wasn't working. Yi Yuxuan sat beside her. He knew that she didn't want to go back to bed. So he stared at her very quietly, waiting for the medicine to take effect. Wei Wei Bai's breathing gradually became less hot. She blinked tiredly and looked at Yi Yuxuan beside her. The way he lowered his eyes was extremely gentle. Wei Wei Bai's voice was slightly hoarse. Are you still suffering from insomnia? Yi Yuxuan looked at her gently and then shook his head. I won't lose sleep if I hug you. These words were said in an unusually calm and serene manner. It didn't feel mushy at all. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Then you can hug me to sleep in the future. Yi Yuxuan was silent for a moment, then suddenly reached out and pulled her into his arms. He even deliberately reached out and pulled the blanket closer, pressing it under her body. He wanted to make sure that not a single gust of wind entered her cold body. Then he sat and let her sit on his lap with her head on his chest. He hugged her tightly. Strong yet gentle. It was a gentle yet strangely safe position. Bai Weiwei blinked. She could hear the sound of his warm heartbeat. Hugging her to sleep, did he misunderstand the meaning of this sentence? Yi Yuxuan said softly, It's my turn to hug you to sleep. You have a fever and you've been sleeping for too long. You'll feel better if I hug you and shake you. Wei Wei Bai fell into deep doubt. Was she a giant baby in Yi Yuxuan's eyes? Yi Yuxuan didn't feel that there was anything wrong with holding her like this. He put one arm under her neck and the other hand hugged her leg, as if he was holding a child, full of protectiveness. Wei Wei Bai always felt that this position was very strange, but very warm. The medicine took effect and she was drowsy. She found that it was very painful to sleep, but in his rocking position, she seemed to be beginning to feel comfortable. She just breathed a sigh of relief. The door opened. Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan came in. Qin Qiu put his hands in his pockets. Bai Changyan was holding his briefcase. Since Yi Yuxuan began to lose sleep and began to sleep, he had to deal with a lot of chores by himself. There was no other way. Who let our son-in-law have a health problem? The two people came in to take a look. They found that Yi Yuxuan, who had always been calm and indifferent, was holding Wei Wei Bai, the giant baby, with a gentle face. Like holding a child, gently rocking her. By Changyan and Qin Qiu, this was a scene that was hard to explain. Unspeakably warm. Unspeakably strange. They really wanted to comment, but they were at a loss for words. Chapter 26:14. Wei Wei Bai had a cold for 3 days. This was the first time that he had been so unwell when he was sick. It made her feel like she was going to die. But because of the high health points, her body was in a state of good and bad. The system checked and told her that it was really just a common cold. Her body was actually not in good condition. Health points were not omnipotent. When she received these health points, her body was already on the verge of death. The health points entered and repaired her body. Sometimes, because of her weak foundation, she could not keep up with the changes, causing her to fall sick. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was fine as long as she did not die. Cold and fever were not a problem. With old Mother Yi around, everything was taken care of for her. She treated her like a fragile object and carefully treated her. That calmness, mushy, and caring to the point of being terrifying. If they were not so familiar with each other, she would not have met a man like Yi Yuxuan who had to accept and control everything. She would also feel flustered. To put it bluntly, Yi Yuxuan was the kind of person who could spoil a person until they became useless. It was fine if it was always like this. She was so happy that she could bubble up to the heavens. She was just worried that one day Yi Yuxuan would suddenly fall in love with someone else. Or even worse, he would feel that the world was not worth it. There was no point in falling in love. There was nothing to like about a woman. He turned around and left, leaving the person who was spoiled to the point of being useless. That would be really miserable. Wei Wei Bai imagined the tragic scene in the future. She trembled violently and immediately had a career heart. She could not let Yi Yuxuan control the rhythm of her life. Otherwise, one day he would leave. If she really became a giant baby, how could she live? To be mature, she started by rejecting Yi Yuxuan. So Wei Wei Bai rejected Yi Yuxuan first and did not let him hug her. She would only hug him if he wanted to sleep. She did not want to hug him normally. She had a fever, not a limp. No matter how thick-skinned she was, she would still blush under the strange gazes of her father and the attending physician. After hearing her reason, Yi Yuxuan stared at her for a long time before nodding. Then, he took Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu, one in each hand, and threw them out. He came back and said, "It's okay. No one is looking at you with strange eyes now." Wei Wei Bai. Then, Yi Yuxuan rolled up his neat sleeves and picked her up. Forehead to forehead, the human thermometer was activated. His thin lips were just inches away from hers, and the black eyes under his eyelashes were bottomless. Yet, it was filled with an intoxicating gentleness. From a robot to a human with feelings, and to this day. A man who loved her deeply. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly into his eyes. Until he sighed softly. "All right, your condition is starting to improve." It wasn't that he had always wanted to control her and take care of her. It was because her physical condition was different from anyone else's. She had died and come back to life, and she had paid a huge price for it. That thing that was neither male nor female had always followed her and protected her. But Yi Yuxuan had always been very rational. Following and protecting could also be monitoring and controlling. Or even using some strange method to give her false hope of survival. Forcing her to keep doing those things she didn't like. She didn't like to go to those places. She didn't like to pretend to like those strange men. Those strange men were him, but she didn't know. He didn't want her to know. But to live, she had no complaints and desperately completed all the impossible tasks. /T. Chapter 26:15. Yi Yuxuan had been in pain because of her departure, but now, he felt his heart ache when he thought of her unwillingness. So he had been focusing on observing her physical condition. He was afraid that her condition would worsen. She would not be able to take the blow. He was even more afraid that that thing was lying to her and that her physical condition was actually a fake recovery. That was why he observed her condition so carefully. He was afraid that he would miss the opportunity to go deeper if he did not see any changes. After more than 3 days, she started to recover from her cold. Everything was normal. Yi Yuxuan also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It was good that she was fine. He did not expect that his behavior would make him a control freak in Wei Wei Bai's eyes. Yi Yuxuan felt that he had to suppress his desire to control. He could not decide everything for her anymore. Then he saw Wei Wei Bai open the refrigerator door and take out a super stimulating and super cold drink. She opened the lid and was about to pour it into her mouth. He stretched out his long legs and pressed down on her shoulders. He took the drink from her hand. Her posture and speed were perfect. He stopped her, but did not let her feel that his actions were rude. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "What are you doing?" Yi Yuxuan held the drink in his hand. He kept saying that the drink was not good for the body and that she should not drink too much since her body had just recovered. Under Wei Wei Bai's calm but strange gaze, he swallowed it. She hated it when he controlled her. So he could not let her feel that he was not even giving her a drink. After all, this was one of the things that had to be decided. Yi Yuxuan's eyelashes fluttered, and his Adam's apple moved. There was a hint of redness on his fair skin. It seemed that he was holding it in. His fingers tightened, and he finally said, "It's not good for this drink to have alcohol." Wei Wei Bai's face was calm. "Yeah, I don't feel too good and want to drink something stimulating to refresh myself. My body has recovered, so I can't not drink this thing." Yi Yuxuan said with great difficulty, "It's not very good for the body." Wei Wei Bai shook her head and advised him, "We only live for a few decades. It's most important to have fun and be happy when you can. Smoking is not healthy, drinking milk tea is not healthy, eating malatang is not healthy, chocolate is delicious, but it is also not healthy. No one can become an immortal without eating or drinking because of this little bit of unhealthiness." Yi Yuxuan, he had no words to retort. No, he couldn't bear to do that. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Do you think I'm wrong?" Yi Yuxuan pursed her lips, her breathing stagnant for a while before she said word by word, "You're right." He couldn't bear to say that she was wrong. But this drink really wasn't a good thing. Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu had been here for too long, causing the fridge to be filled with unhealthy drinks, snacks, and drinks brought by the two unhealthy old men. In the past, Yi Yuxuan only had mineral water in her fridge. And it was the most expensive kind by air. There was nothing else left. Because he felt that what the human body needed most was water. Everything else was drinks, alcohol, and so on. They were all unnecessary. As a result, during this time, his house became lively. It also began to become messy. Even his own rhythm of life and eating habits changed. Everything changed. So, it was that old man's fault. He gave her the opportunity to drink this thing. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her hand with a faint expression. "Well, if you don't drink it, it won't be cold. This drink won't taste good if it's not cold." Yi Yuxuan was silent for a long time before she handed the drink over with difficulty. Chapter 26:16. Wei Wei Bai, there's only this bottle of drink left in the fridge. Next time, I'll ask my dad to get more. Yi Yuxuan's fingers paused and he poured the drink into his mouth. Wei Wei Bai, Yi Yuxuan took a big gulp and said expressionlessly, "It's delicious." Wei Wei Bai, this is my. Yi Yuxuan took another big gulp and there was only half a bottle left. Yes, I'm thirsty. After all, it doesn't taste good if it's not cold. Let's finish it quickly. Wei Bai, no, didn't you think it was unhealthy? Yi Yuxuan continued drinking and said, we have to wake up in time in life. So what if it's unhealthy? Those who smoke and drink are all living happily. I want to learn from them. Wei Bai, Yi Yuxuan took another sip and suddenly realized, oh right, there's only one bottle left. Do you want to drink it too? Wei Bai looked at the bottle in his hand. There was only one last sip left. It was a small sip. She felt that she still had some integrity. She really couldn't drink the rest of the drink. However, as someone who was good at arguing, she said calmly, yes, drink it. She really didn't believe that Yi Yuxuan would let her drink it. If he really let her drink it, she wouldn't have drunk the whole bottle in a few mouthfuls. This drink was cold, but it was quite stimulating to the taste buds. It was good that most people didn't spit it out in one mouthful. When Yi Yuxuan heard her words, he looked up and stared at her. After a while, he sighed and said, you can drink it. After all, I'm not thirsty anymore. Wei Bai was about to refuse. Who would drink the rest of your drink? However, Yi Yuxuan took a mouthful of the drink into his mouth. He lowered his head and kissed her. Wei Bai, it was so little that it wasn't cold at all. Yi Yuxuan raised her head, straightened her body, and said calmly, does it taste good? Wei Bai, respect, respect, respect. She admitted defeat. In the future, he would definitely not drink this lousy drink. Every time he saw this drink, he would remember that he had drunk a mouthful of someone else's leftovers. And it was the leftovers from someone else's mouth. Baw, baw, baw. This was probably Yi Yuxuan's sinister motive. She accepted that he had one. Although Yi Yuxuan suppressed her control freak mode, she did not seem to be any better as a follower. Wei Bai took a longer time to come back this time. Being sick was one thing. More importantly, she also wanted to rest. Therefore, after he recovered, he started to wear a loose sweater and wander around. She even went shopping at the mall. She bought clothes and shoes for her old father and some medical books for Qinqiu. He also bought a bunch of things for himself. Women had a lot of things, and there was no end to buying them. Yi Yuxuan was responsible for carrying the bags. The two of them went out at 2:00. They wore the same loose sweater and branded sunglasses. Their exposed noses and jawlines were so beautiful that they did not look human. Wei Bai had not been out for too long, which caused her skin to be white and pink. Walking in the crowd, she was simply a shining body like snow. She was as beautiful and delicate as a doll. Yi Yuxuan's face was dark the whole time because too many people's eyes were on her. He could not continue to think about it because he could not control her too much. She did not like control freaks. After Wei Bai gave the gifts around, Yi Yuxuan finally reacted. Where was his gift? This was the first time that Yi Yuxuan had the concept of a gift in his mind. Although he had this idea, he did not say anything because it did not seem right to ask for a gift. He also flipped through the book and looked up the meaning of a gift. He found that it was indeed not to ask for a gift. Otherwise, it would not be a gift, but a debt. Chapter 26:17. In the real world, Wei Bai stayed for almost a month. She had already recovered enough life points. She felt that she had rested enough and said to the system, okay, let's get ready to go. The system nodded. Wei Bai turned to look at Yi Yuxuan. She shook the sweater in her hand. It was a very simple design, black. The sweater was very well finished. It was also very tasteful. With Yi Yuxuan's figure, it would definitely look very good in it. Wei Wei Bai admired it for a while before saying to Yi Yuxuan, who was sitting on the sofa and reading a pile of profound books in the original language, "It's for you." She had already given him a gift. His gift was not bought but knitted by her. It was the only skill she had learned in the past few years of living in the plain. She was familiar and professional. Yi Yuxuan had his head lowered and was studying some profound questions. His serious eyes trembled before he slowly looked up. He saw Wei Wei Bai half lying on the sofa with a sweater in her hand. She was asleep. No, she was gone. Wei Wei Bai had just finished speaking when the system carried her away. Yi Yuxuan got up, pulled the blanket over and wrapped her tightly, and carried her into the room easily. After settling her down, he came back to get the sweater. Yi Yuxuan looked at the sweater for a long time before realizing that the style was similar to the one she knitted in her dream. It was just that the color was different. Yi Yuxuan looked at the sweater and could not help but smile. A spreading gentleness. This was really his favorite and most beautiful gift. Wei Wei Bai had just woken up when she heard the sound of things falling. "Yu Xiaoyun, you can't do this to me. I've given up everything for you." The woman's sharp voice was unusually ear-piercing. Wei Wei Bai immediately frowned. Her breathing was a little irregular, and it seemed that the surroundings were very oppressive and dark. She found that she was squatting in the closet. The closet was tightly closed, leaving a gap. She looked over. He couldn't see anything. There was only one woman lying on the ground, wailing and crying. "I love you, I really love you so much. The old man wanted to kill you, but I was the one who tried my best to persuade him to give up. How can you turn your back on me?" Wei Wei Bai felt a little uncomfortable. It seemed that the back of her head hurt a lot. There was no memory transfer yet. "You're already having a headache." The woman crawled forward awkwardly and reached out to grab the trousers of a man's black suit. The handmade leather shoes were so clean that not a speck of dust could be seen. Under the trousers were faintly discernible white socks. Before he could see anything, he saw a foot first. She was just about to stretch her head out to see what was going on outside. Then, an indifferent voice rang out. "I'm very grateful for what you did for the old man." He was as indifferent as the clouds, and the way he spoke was elegant. His deep voice had a hint of hoarseness to it, which was exceptionally pleasing to the ear. "But you're no longer of any use, so it's time for you to leave." After saying that, the woman suddenly said in horror, "No, you can't do this to me, you can't." Wei Wei Bai heard the sound of glass shattering. Then, there was a blood-curdling scream. The man's voice was still indifferent and elegant. Her depression was too serious, so she committed suicide. There seemed to be other people in the room who responded respectfully. Yes, she committed suicide. Wei Wei Bai, had she coincidentally come to some terrifying and bloody scene that she couldn't see? Although she was still dumbfounded. But Wei Wei Bai calmly hid herself and didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. Outside the wardrobe, the people began to leave. The man also slowly got up, but he didn't walk out. Instead, he walked towards her, step by step. /save button. Chapter 26:18. The system suddenly said, "I'm a few minutes late. Do you want to transmit the information?" Wei Wei Bai was eager to know how this strange and violent scene was formed. She immediately nodded. Okay. A burst of complicated memory data attacked her. Wei Wei Bai could already process these memories very quickly. Within a few seconds, her face turned pale, and only then did she know where she was. The woman who had just jumped out of the window was her sister, Bai Yanlan. The Bai family had been a wealthy family for generations, but in this generation, they fell a little ugly. Because of a man named Yu Xiaoyun. Yu Xiaoyun was an orphan and was adopted by the Bai family. Yu Xiaoyun's father was the team leader who helped the Bai family deal with the dark business. But later, to clean up the business, he killed Yu Xiaoyun's father. Back then, Yu Xiaoyun was still young, only 4 or 5 years old. The Bai family thought that he didn't remember, and that killing his old subordinates was still a merit. They were afraid that it would make their subordinates bitterly disappointed. So they adopted Yu Xiaoyun hypocritically. To put on an act, although they were neither cold nor indifferent to Yu Xiaoyun, they didn't abuse him. Yu Xiaoyun lived in the Bai family until he was 18 years old in such a low-key manner that he almost didn't exist. And from the age of 18, he was born out of nowhere. He established a company and snatched the Bai family's resources. He oppressed the Bai family. His methods were ruthless and crazy. It was the only way for a wolf cub to become a wolf king. He coldly schemed against the Bai family, causing all the Bai family members to fall apart. He caused the few successors of the Bai family, who were all Bai Yanlan's brothers, to be taken care of by all kinds of accidents. Old Master Bai had no choice but to do everything he could. He suppressed Yu Xiaoyun. He even successfully caught Yu Xiaoyun once. If he killed Yu Xiaoyun that time, there would be no future. However, Bai Yanlan rushed out to plead for mercy for Yu Xiaoyun. She even used her identity as his fiancée to desperately ask Old Master Bai to let Yu Xiaoyun go. And most of the tragic accidents of those brothers were actually Bai Yanlan's doing. If it was someone else, Old Master Bai would have dragged Bai Yanlan out and skinned her alive. However, the old master was an affectionate person. He was so infatuated that it made people stunned. Bai Yanlan was the child of the woman he loved the most when he was young. And then the woman died to give birth to his second child. The old man felt guilty and loved Bai Yanlan deeply. He doted on her to the heavens. No one in the Bai family could compare to Bai Yanlan in terms of status. If it weren't for the fact that Bai Yanlan was too stupid and couldn't be nurtured, the old man would have broken the rule that women couldn't be the successor. Instead, Bai Yanlan was promoted. Therefore, although she participated in the plot to harm the people of her family, she was not a part of it. The old master still suppressed these things on his own. He was afraid that when he dealt with Yu Xiaoyun, he would implicate Bai Yanlan and let Yu Xiaoyun go. However, Yu Xiaoyun was imprisoned in the Bai family. He was not allowed to go out, nor was he allowed to contact the outside world. Someone was watching him all the time. Bai Yanlan was one of the people monitoring him. Yu Xiaoyun did not use Bai Yanlan's love to escape from the Bai family. After all, Bai Yanlan's love for him was so crazy that she would rather harm her own family. She even lied to her father and wanted to dismantle the Bai family for Yu Xiaoyun. But she would not help him escape from the Bai family. Loving someone to the point of imprisoning them was her intention. Yu Xiaoyun was monitored in the Bai family for 6 years. During the 6 years, he nibbled away and destroyed the Bai family step by step. Chapter 26:19. Everything was going on in the dark. No one in the Bai family noticed his actions. He was like a spider in the dark, silently waiting for the old master of the Bai family to wake up. That youth named Yu Xiaoyun had already grown into a terrifying and powerful man. He had been going against the Bai family since he was 18 years old. It took him 11 years to successfully trample the Bai family under his feet. And the scene she saw just now was Yu Xiaoyun starting to settle the score with his enemies. Although Bai Yanlan loved Yu Xiaoyun madly, she was also used by Yu Xiaoyun to deal with the Bai family. But to keep him, Bai Yanlan, she participated in imprisoning him and even tried to force herself on him with drugs. Later, she found out that he had successfully crushed the Bai family and become extremely powerful. He even held a knife and wanted to take him down with him. The scene she saw just now was that Bai Yanlan held a knife and wanted to kill Yu Xiaoyun. She wanted to drag him to his death. Because Bai Yanlan knew that she couldn't keep him, she planned to die with him. She wanted to trap him with death. Unfortunately, to Yu Xiaoyun, this kind of love was an assassination. That was why he kicked her out just now. Then Bai Yanlan smashed through the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside the glass was a height of more than 10 stories. She must have died. 11 years, 18 years old. Wei Wei Bai counted with her fingers. 29 years old. She was a little old. In the past, most of the targets were teenagers, unless they were immortal cultivators or inhumans. Otherwise, they were all younger. However, if her identity in this plane was higher, then it would be more suitable for her. Then, she quickly opened her information memory. Her memory was very short. It was very tragic. Bai Weiwei's face was strangely expressionless. In this plane, she was still Wei Wei Bai. She was just 18 years old. It was a flower. She was the second child of the woman that old Master Bai loved the most. Because of a difficult birth, her mother died. Old Master Bai hated her so much that he didn't want to see her at all. Since she was young, he didn't ask about her. He said that when he saw her, he would think of his dead white moonlight. In a place like the Bai family, there were a bunch of people who flattered and fawned over him. There are a lot of people who are used to swaying to the wind. She saw that she was despised by old Master Bai and had not been taken good care of since she was young. There was also a period of time when he was bullied by the servants and was locked in a small dark room without food. When Wei Wei Bai saw this information, she was stunned for 2 seconds. She also recalled that when she was young, she was locked up in a small dark room by the servants, which left her with the after effect of being afraid of the dark. Of course, this was not the worst. When he was young, he was not well taken care of and was mentally abused. He was also whipped in a way that did not leave a mark. It only made the original owner a little depressed and autistic, but she was still a normal child. At most, his reaction would be a little slow. Later, because Bai Yanlan started to have a crush on Yu Xiaoyun, she became angry because she couldn't get what she wanted. She had to play the role of an obedient daughter in front of the old man again. After a long time, when she was angry, she often abused the original owner. The reason was that it was easier to torture his own sister. Wei Wei Bai thought, there are so many perverts out there, but this is the first time I've seen such a pervert who deserves a beating. Who in the family would stick up for the original owner? The eldest miss didn't need to be careful and leave no trace when beating her own sister. The original owner, this poor little girl, was abused to the point that there was a problem with her mental state. She was originally a normal little pitiful girl. In the end, she was abused by her sister, who was many years older than her, to the point of isolating herself. It was as if ignoring the outside world, not laughing, and not talking could save herself. Chapter 26-20. In the end, it caused her to become autistic. Although she was different from a naturally autistic child, her state of silence was particularly serious. After reading the information, although it was very long, only 10 seconds had passed. Outside the wardrobe, the footsteps still stopped. Wei Wei Bai, if she was discovered, would she be thrown down to be lovey-dovey with the perverted sister, or would she be killed by the target? This was really a question of death. Just as she was thinking about this, the wardrobe door slowly opened. The first thing Wei Wei Bai saw was the beautiful hand on the wardrobe door. The slightly raised curve of the knuckles was unusually beautiful. On the delicate and clean fingertips, the round nails were trimmed short and neat. This was a pair of well-raised aristocratic hands. The sun came in and shone into Wei Wei Bai's clean eyes. She was so excited that she blinked her eyes, and tears instantly surged up. The man with his back to the light was wearing a black suit. The buttons on his white shirt were meticulously buttoned, and he looked cold and reserved. However, his face was exceptionally delicate. He could even be said to be elegant and gentle. His eyes were light brown, and the curve of his eyes was extremely gentle. When he was cold, there was no trace of hostility in his eyes. On the contrary, it made people feel that he was very gentle. This was a pair of affectionate eyes. Even if they were full of murderous intent, they were very affectionate, as if they were flirting. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment. After all, it was rare to see such a person who was so different from his appearance. And this kind of inconsistency was not deliberately caused. Perhaps he did not expect that there was a petite girl hidden in the wardrobe. The man frowned slightly. Then he lowered his eyes. His beautiful eyelids were lowered, and his eyes were clear. His thin lips opened slightly. Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai was very famous. She was famous in the Bai family for being a punching bag. When Yu Xiaoyun lived in the Bai family, he would occasionally see Bai Yanlong hit her. But so what? The Bai family was a deformed and dark rich family. It was normal for dirty things to happen. He had always had no sympathy for these things. In fact, he was unusually indifferent. Therefore, he could not remember what Wei Wei Bai looked like because he had never paid attention to her before. Yu Xiaoyun looked at the young girl who was hugging herself in fear and lowering her head. His gaze was cold, but the curve of his eyes was unusually gentle. There was no sense of deterrence at all. Target discovered. The mission this time was to obtain Yu Xiaoyun's love. Target, Yu Xiaoyun. Progress, 0, time, temporary. The girl seemed to feel his gaze as she timidly raised her head. Under the messy hair that was like splashed ink, there was a fair and clear face that was so fragile that it was like a thin mist. There was a sickly sense of whiteness. The skin at the corner of her lips was broken, and there were red marks on her cheeks. They were the result of a beating. The girl's eyes were round and moist like a cat's. They were misty and unbelievably clean. This sickly delicate appearance was surprisingly clear and beautiful. She didn't look like someone from the Bai family at all. It was more like a little elf that had been locked in a cage and whipped with wounds. It carried with it a sense of cleanliness, yet it had a sadistic beauty that made people want to destroy it. There was an imperceptible fluctuation in Yu Xiaoyun's eyes. His fingertips that touched the wardrobe door unconsciously used a bit more strength. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 5. Wei Wei Bai, the target of this world actually has a favorability towards the original owner. Could it be that the target had a compassionate heart? So when he saw her in such a miserable state, he developed sympathy. Yu Xiaoyun did not seem to notice the fluctuation in his heart. He reached out his hand expressionlessly. Just as he was about to touch her, a trace of fear flashed through Wei Wei Bai's clear eyes, and she hurriedly stepped back. The wardrobe was too small. She sank into the clothes and had no space to hide. Address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Download of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 26-21. Therefore, the man easily grabbed her arm. When he grabbed her arm, a trace of surprise flashed across Yu Xiaoyun's eyes. He didn't expect her to be so thin and weak. The pale and slender arm that could be broken with a pinch made him use less strength. Under Yu Xiaoyun's gentle strength, it was inevitable that Wei Wei Bai was directly pulled out. Wei Wei Bai almost rolled out of the wardrobe. Yu Xiaoyun indifferently stepped back and let go of her hand, letting her fall on the carpet. The girl's long hair was almost unkempt, and it fell to the ground below her knees. It was like an ink-colored flower quilt spreading out, under the thick color of ink. It was her abnormally white skin, and under the loose robe, her exquisite and conspicuous collarbone line. She seemed to be frightened. She raised her eyes and looked at him in confusion and grievance. Yu Xiaoyun's incomparably cold and indifferent heart was touched by this gaze. But this touch was too shallow. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. To him, the people of the Bai family should all disappear. So Yu Xiaoyun's movements were elegant and slow. He half squatted down and reached out to touch her lips. There were traces of broken skin. It was shallow, but it definitely hurt. As expected, he saw a trace of cowardice appear on Wei Bai's blank expression. Yu Xiaoyun raised his eyebrows. His features were delicate and elegant. A child like you would definitely be very popular if sold to those places. Delicate, beautiful, and fragile. So delicate that it made people want to destroy her. She was simply the favorite type of some sick people. Yu Xiaoyun thought coldly that it would be a pity to kill her. This child was really exquisite and beautiful, like a flower that grew out of the mud of the Bai family. The price would definitely be high. Wei Bai was now pure, clean, and mentally retarded. Of course, she couldn't understand his words, so she could only look at Yu Xiaoyun with a confused and innocent face. Yu Xiaoyun met her pair of eyes that were as clean as spring water. His gentle eyes turned a little colder. He let go of her lips, stood up, and casually took out a handkerchief to wipe his fingertips. A bodyguard came over with a phone in his hand. Yu Xiaoyun didn't care about the little toy behind him. He picked up the phone. "Oh, is the old man still unwilling to tell me the secret of what my father left behind?" Before his father died, he left behind a box. It contained something for him. Yu Xiaoyun was not greedy for the treasures that might appear in the box. All he wanted was a memory of his home. In the box, there was a photo of their family, as well as their parents' belongings. At that time, he was still young and couldn't stop the old man from inspecting everything in his house. Completely destroyed. The old man was just afraid that his father would leave some evidence that could be used against him. Yu Xiaoyun's expression was still calm and gentle. He wouldn't say anything even if I tortured him. After a pause, he said, "The old man wants to see Bai Yanlan." Bai Yanlan was dead. Seeing the corpse, the old man would probably be even more unwilling to speak. However, Yu Xiaoyun casually lowered his head. He saw the girl lying on the ground struggling to sit up. She did not seem to have any reaction to the outside world, nor did she reveal a ferocious expression or scream out of fear. It was as if she was a doll isolated in a crystal bowl. She did not cry, laugh, or speak. It was probably the aftermath of being abused too much. Yu Xiaoyun thought rationally and coldly. Then he casually said, "It's okay. Without Bai Yanlan, there's still Wei Bai. They were all born of the woman he loved the most. I'll bring them over later. If they still refuse to speak, then let the father and daughter go to the netherworld together. They won't be lonely." At this point, the man's eyes were as gentle as the spring breeze, affectionate and beautiful. His voice was also calm and elegant. "This is the last bit of kindness I can offer you. Read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Read the at https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 26-22. Yu Xiaoyun said such vicious words in a calm and natural manner, as if it was a matter of course. His gaze swept across the broken glass indifferently, and his words were calm and slow. "Get someone to clean it up. It's dirty." He lived comfortably in the Bai family and planned to stay like this. Of course, it wouldn't be called the Bai family in the future. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes were clear and thin, but the gentle ends of his eyes were as beautiful as the willows in the spring breeze. Even if he just stood there quietly, he would attract anyone's attention. Even if they were unknowingly attracted to him. If he accidentally looked at you, a glance that lasted for 10,000 years, he would not regret it. Even if his heart was terrifyingly cold, he would not let people feel that kind of cruelty. Yu Xiaoyun could live so comfortably in the Bai family for so many years. Other than being monitored, he had almost everything. It was 10,000 times better than Wei Bai. It was also because he was too good-looking, so good-looking that people couldn't bear to leave any scars in his beautiful eyes. And Bai Yanlan was the most severely poisoned patient in the final stage of Yu Xiaoyun's illness. She loved Yu Xiaoyun to the point of going crazy. The only thing she had done to him was to drug him and force herself on him. In the end, Yu Xiaoyun told her to get lost. Bai Yanlan was so ashamed that she ran away crying. She did not dare to blame him at all. Later, she wanted to kill Yu Xiaoyun because she wanted to die with him. In the end, he did not have any feelings at all. Wei Bai did not look in the mirror, so she did not know what she looked like. But when she saw that the target of the strategy was so enchanting, she was jealous. The last plane sent out some kind of number one beauty, but in the end, it was an upgraded version of the girl next door. In this plane, there was another one whose appearance was crushing. She felt that everyone was better looking than her. After hearing Wei Bai's complaints, the system fell silent. She was going to be dragged to death by the male lead. She still cared about whether she was good-looking or not. Wei Bai, so, what do you think after hearing this? And the number one beauty medal or something? Being ugly has no future. Look at how good my strategy target is. The system looked at the discount medal for the most beautiful woman in the supermarket. Cheap, cheap. It's only 1 day of HP. This is the first time I've seen such a cheap price. He tapped his finger on a random item beside the medal. Then, the system calmly said, the number one beauty requires 20,000 HP. You can't buy it, but you have a side reward. Hey, you have a unique and cute aura. You'll definitely be better than the male lead. Why didn't he say 10,000 HP? Because the host really did have 10,000 HP. Women's impulse spending was too scary. He had to be on guard. As for the number one beauty, the system's face turned pale. It didn't want to see the host holding his face in narcissism every day. It was too blinding. He had to take care of his eyes. Right, what kind of aura did he buy? He only saw the word disposition, but he didn't see it clearly. Reward, the pitiful little girl has a delicate temperament. Whoever sees her will abuse her. Whoever abuses her will like her. You don't need 999 yuan. It'll be delivered to your home for 9 yuan. You deserve to have her. The system was speechless. It had forgotten to remove the vulgar advertising message. Wei Bai, what was this pitiful little thing's temperament? There was also 9 yuan for shipping. The side reward was finally exposed. It gave a reward that was casually bought on Saihe. They were all cheap goods. She deserved to have them. In the eyes of the side reward, she was only worth 9 yuan. It even included shipping. And it didn't even bother to hide it. If it wasn't for the side reward button being broken, she wouldn't have let it live for so long. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Save button below to record this reading record. Chapter 26-23. Wei Bai, in the future, I will have a lot of life points. Can I buy a button to euthanize a side quest? System, by Weiwei, ha 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 ha. System, in the future, when the host knew that her rewards were all found by him from the trash can, he would occasionally go to the supermarket to buy her cheap goods for 9.90 yuan. She wouldn't give him the euthanasia button, right? No way. Weiwei Bai lowered her head. Everyone was too lazy to notice the change in her. Yu Xiaoyun's indifferent and noble gaze did not fall on the girl behind him. He stepped forward. His every move was as smooth as flowing water. To the Love Garden. The Love Garden was where the old master lived. It was the most beautiful garden in the Bai family and had been built for the longest time. It was also the place where the old master missed the woman he loved the most. Weiwei Bai was a little timid, as if she did not know where so many people came from. The dress she was wearing was very loose, light blue, and it was obvious that Bai Yanlan didn't want it. Those bodyguards were too rough. Seeing that she was not walking fast, they could not wait. They directly pushed her. Weiwei Bai staggered and looked up in fear. Her eyes were filled with a layer of helpless mist. The bodyguards were moved by her look, but there was a softer and more violent emotion. But before they could understand what it was, Weiwei Bai had already lowered her head. Then, she held the thin dress with both hands and quickened her pace. In the Love Garden. The old master was on the verge of death. He knew that there was no secret to the box. It was just a method that Yu Xiaoyun, that hungry wolf, wanted to torture him. It was just a broken box filled with family photos and some worthless relics. Was it worth Yu Xiaoyun making such a big fuss? Or maybe Yu Xiaoyun's rotten intestines really contained a trace of nostalgia for his parents. But the old master looked at people ruthlessly. This hungry wolf wanted to be satisfied. He wanted to see the Bai family destroyed in his hands. Furthermore, all the members of the Bai family had died miserably. The lotus flowers in the Love Garden had just bloomed. The Love Garden, with its Chinese pavilions, terraces, and pagodas, made people feel as if they had traveled through time and space. Yu Xiaoyun walked across the small bridge at a leisurely pace. The shadow of the lotus leaves fell on his eyebrows, making him look even more handsome. It was clear and elegant as jade. This was the old master's impression of Yu Xiaoyun. Before this man revealed his fangs, he was always so unhurried, as slow as the wind. There was not the slightest bit of offensive power. He even made all the people who were monitoring him say good things about him. The old man really regretted listening to these words. She let go of this man for the sake of her beloved daughter. Yu Xiaoyun walked up to the old man. The old man could no longer walk. Compared to the others, he was still considered decent. All the torture was on his feet. Even though the bones in his feet were completely shattered, he was still able to maintain his posture with his pants. The old man aged more than 10 years overnight. His hair was all messy, and the corners of his eyes were full of wrinkles. He was tired and resentful. Where is my daughter? He had failed, and the Bai family was done for. His only thought now was to protect his daughter. The other children were all born for the sake of the family and had no choice but to marry. Only Bai Yanlan was the woman he loved the most. She was born from his first love who had been with him for so many years. He was in so much pain that it went to his bones. When Yu Xiaoyun saw his former enemy, he was also elegant and silent. Fast fast. Chapter 26-24. He turned his head and looked at the petite figure in the crowd with her head lowered. A slender and thin figure, fragile and pitiful, stood among a group of tall bodyguards. She seemed to be at a loss. Yu Xiaoyun's gaze lingered on her messy black hair for a few seconds. Then, he turned his head and said calmly, "You have 2 daughters. One is dead, and I've brought the remaining one to you. The old master's eyes widened. Who died? Is it that brat who brings death? Wei Wei Bai was in his eyes. She was a jinx. She caused the death of his beloved at birth. Then, not long after she was born, a big project that could have brought the Bai family to a higher level failed because of negligence. When he thought of Wei Wei Bai, he thought of his failure. That was why he had never liked her. If one death could save Bai Yanlan, it would be fine as long as the one who died was Wei Wei Bai. Before the old master's selfish thoughts dissipated, he looked up and saw a slender figure standing among the bodyguards. It was Wei Wei Bai. He choked on his breath and his face turned red. He took his walking stick and threw it at Wei Wei Bai. You jinx, you caused the death of your sister. Why aren't you the one who died? The walking stick fell beside Wei Wei Bai's feet because it didn't have enough strength. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and her shoulders trembled, but she didn't dodge. It seemed that she was used to being bullied. She didn't dare to dodge anyone who bullied her. Yu Xiaoyun looked at this scene calmly and even felt that Wei Wei Bai was a little pitiful. It was just a little. He seemed to have thought of something and his lips curled into a smile. His originally gentle eyes became even more affectionate and beautiful. Then, he turned around and walked in front of Wei Wei Bai. Do you understand what I'm saying? His voice was low and unusually gentle. It was as if he was talking to the person he liked, and there was joy in his words. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have never been treated so gently. Her eyelashes fluttered, and a glimmer of light appeared in her numb eyes. Then, she gently raised her head. Amidst her messy black hair, she was as timid as a pitiful little bird. Under her wet eyelashes, her clear eyes finally looked at Yu Xiaoyun. Yu Xiaoyun's gaze paused for a moment before he smiled. Do you hate him? Wei Wei Bai looked at him in confusion. Her misty eyes were incomparably pure. It was as if she didn't understand his cold thoughts at all. Yu Xiaoyun even felt that she seemed to be mocking him for being eager for revenge and full of dark thoughts. He was too clean. It made him want to bully her. Yu Xiaoyun's smile was still there, but it was much colder. He gestured for someone to bring over a knife. Then he said to her, "Play a game. Did you see that, Grandpa? If you kill him, no one will bully you anymore." An almost autistic girl. He was more like a child who didn't know anything about the world. Was it really that simple to live in a hellish environment where one was constantly bullied? Yu Xiaoyun had always harbored the greatest malice towards this world. Maybe she hated him too. But she just hid it. Yu Xiaoyun reached out and touched the wound on her lips with his fingertips again. His round fingernails slid over her wound. It made her tremble in pain. But she still didn't know how to avoid it. A trace of grievance appeared in her misty eyes as she looked at him. She seemed to be in a lot of pain, but she didn't dare to say it out loud. She could only look at him with such a gaze that made people want to bully him to death. At this moment, he even felt that he was her god. He could do whatever he wanted to her. And she wouldn't resist at all. She was really a masochist. Chapter 26-25. Yu Xiaoyun suddenly understood why that woman, Bai Yanlan, liked to bully her so much. Even when he saw her fragile and pitiful appearance, he wanted to do something even more outrageous to her. Yu Xiaoyun's fingertips loosened. When he saw her even redder lips, his fingertips couldn't help but rub against them. But he didn't touch her again. But the smile on his face disappeared. He ordered indifferently, "Go over and kill him." Wei Wei Bai didn't understand what he said. It was rare for Yu Xiaoyun to feel a trace of malicious anxiety in his heart. He stuffed the knife into her hand and pinched her fingers, but because her fingers were too slender, he didn't know what to do. His fingertips paused before he slowed down his strength. Then he held her hand and walked in front of the old master. He stood behind Wei Wei Bai. His slender body easily shrouded her in his shadow. Yu Xiaoyun could easily pull her into his embrace with just a stretch of his hand. His eyes darkened, but he didn't really reach out to hug her. It was just a little thing. Could it be that he had a desire? Yu Xiaoyun, who had always been cold, suppressed the dark heat in his heart and spoke in an angelic voice. But he said the words of the devil, "Kill him, Wei Wei. Then you will be free." Although she had been bullied to the point of becoming stupid. However, she could still understand simple words. After all, she wasn't born stupid. She was born stupid. So Yu Xiaoyun wasn't worried that she wouldn't understand. The old master stared fiercely at Wei Wei Bai. "How dare you, unfilial daughter!" Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but take a step back in fear when she was yelled at by him. Her thin back bumped into the arms of the man behind her. It was like a thin wind, but also like a soft feather. Her breath was soft and fragrant. Her ink-black hair rubbed against his slender and fair neck, giving him a scratchy and itchy sensation. Yu Xiaoyun was also stunned by the sudden contact. Of course, this stunned moment was very short. No one saw that he was distracted. The thought that flashed through his mind wasn't noticed by anyone. He was actually thinking that it would be very comfortable to carry this little fellow. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have bumped into the person behind her. She was a little scared and immediately took a few steps forward, not daring to touch him. His arms that had just warmed up turned cold again. Yu Xiaoyun didn't say anything. He just lowered his eyelashes and his eyes darkened. He said lightly, "If I don't kill him, I'll sell you." Originally, he wanted to say kill. But he was actually reluctant to part with such a delicate little fellow. Even young Master Yu, who was used to doing business, couldn't bring himself to say something as wasteful as killing her. Wei Wei Bai trembled and turned to look at him. Tears and despair appeared in her misty eyes. Only then did Yu Xiaoyun remember that this sentence was somewhat familiar. It seemed to be a sentence that Bai Yanlan often said when she hit her. If she was disobedient, then he would sell her. They were sold to a place where they were worse than animals. Bai Yanlan's words were even worse than his. He originally thought that the little guy didn't understand his words, but he didn't expect that the little guy actually knew. How pitiful, everyone wanted to bully her. Yu Xiaoyun thought indifferently, and his expression became much colder. He saw that she was extremely pitiful, silently pleading as she looked at him. Sparkling tears flowed out drop by drop. For some reason, his heart softened a little. However, another hot and twisted desire surged in his heart. He really wanted her to continue crying. Bullying her was like an addiction. He urged her in a low voice, "Do you want to be sold?" This wasn't his personality. It was as if he couldn't help but make her cry when he saw her. Wei Wei Bai cried silently. She held the knife in her hand as if she didn't know what to do. His dilly-dallying manner made everyone wait impatiently. Just as Yu Xiaoyun was about to say forget it after being dawdled by her, the old man suddenly rushed over. He snatched the knife from Wei Wei Bai's hand and was about to stab it into her chest. "Instead of letting you humiliate the Bai family, why don't you come with me?" Yu Xiaoyun's pupils constricted. Without thinking much, he reached out and pulled her out of the dangerous attack range. Then, he kicked old Master Bai away. The old man, who was already on his last breath, fell to the ground with a miserable howl. The disability of his leg made him unable to stand up. Yu Xiaoyun looked at him coldly. His eyes were cold and frosty. The gentle outline of his eyes couldn't resist the cold anger that made one's heart tremble. "Get rid of it," he sneered. Anyway, the old man wouldn't tell him the whereabouts of the box. He had turned the Bai family upside down. Was he afraid that he wouldn't be able to find the box? After saying that, he turned around expressionlessly. A trace of hostility appeared on his usually indifferent face. After taking a few steps, the corner of his shirt was grabbed by a small hand. His neat coat was messed up by this tug. Yu Xiaoyun stopped in his tracks. He turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai lowering her head. Her long bangs covered most of her face. Only her bright red lips were exposed. She pursed her lips, and her cherry red lips trembled. Don't sell me. Chapter 26. Wasn't she a fool? And as far as he knew, this child had not spoken for nearly 5 years. Her voice was so soft and choppy. Just listening to it made one feel pity for her. It was as if she was trying to please others. She was so delicate and tender. Yu Xiaoyun still had a lot of things to do, so he didn't have time to waste on her. He had just gotten the Bai family. There were still a lot of headache-inducing chores. He was as natural and elegant as the spring breeze. He reached out and gently touched her head. He whispered, "What's wrong? Are you scared?" It was clearly a cold gaze, but his eyes were surprisingly gentle. It made people feel that he liked her very much. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head. Her eyelashes trembled under her bangs, and she secretly looked up at him. As if she felt that he was very gentle, her fingertips pinched the corner of his shirt even harder. That dependent look was as if she had seen the light of redemption. Little by little, they came out from her dark and clean eyes. Her eyes were too beautiful and pure. It made Yu Xiaoyun a little unhappy. He didn't like it when people looked at him like that. This kind of yearning for redemption reminded him of himself when he was young. Yearning for redemption was the instinct of the weak. And he had long lost the empathy of the weak. So he took a step back. Wei Wei Bai followed suit and took a step forward. Yu Xiaoyun's gentle eyes slightly raised. He pressed his fingertips on the back of her hand. "I'm not selling you." He was too lazy to sell her. After all, he had to start to organize and take away the businesses in those places. There were many unspeakable affairs in the Bai family that he needed to clean up one by one. Only by earning some clean money could he save himself from trouble. He had never liked trouble. But not selling her didn't mean that he could tolerate her. So Yu Xiaoyun bent down and said with a gentle smile, "I'm going to work. Let go and wait for me here, okay?" Wait, little fool. From hope to despair, one always had to experience more before one knew how to mature. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. Her cat-like round eyes were bright, and she quickly nodded. She was like a kitten that had always relied on its owner, weak and cute. She carefully released the corner of his clothes. Seeing the marks on the corner of his clothes, she couldn't help but reach out and touch them. The gentle strength of her fingertips was like a claw, rubbing against his skin through his clothes. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her indifferently. Then, he looked away and said calmly, "Let's go." He did not instruct anyone on how to deal with Wei Wei Bai. He just wanted her to wait. As for where he would wait and how he would wait, he did not say. Wei Wei Bai also stood in place obediently, as if she felt that he would come back to find her. However, Yu Xiaoyun did not turn around. Wei Wei Bai felt like a pitiful and innocent kitten that was placed in a cardboard box. Her 2 paws rested on the edge of the cardboard box, revealing 2 pitiful big black eyes. Kept by the balls. Dried ball fish. The ball loves me. The system said, "Don't look, the black-hearted ghost is gone. He lied to you, he will never adopt you." Wei Wei Bai said, "Oh, I know. I just feel that the delicate and pitiful temperament is not a waste. Let me look at it for another 500 years, and use this temperament of $9.09 package shipping to the fullest. I won't waste the wonderful reward from the side mission. The system was speechless. He did not dare to say that he had pressed the wrong button. He really thought that it was a temperament or something. He did not know that it was a temperament that made people bully her. The system quietly opened its little vault. Although it had some private savings, it was still far from being able to buy a decent reward. // Chapter 26-27. He shed tears of poverty. Suddenly, he didn't hate the side quest anymore. After all, it could be used as a scapegoat. Wei Wei Bai stood in place for a long time. In the end, she couldn't squat anymore and squatted down. Then it started to rain heavily. She hid under the flowers and didn't dare to go near the trees. She was worried that she would be struck by lightning if she did too many bad things. She had done something wrong. She was in awe of ghosts and lightning. She walked in the middle of the night. It was not unreasonable for her to be so afraid of the dark. With the wicked things she had done, if there was a punishment, it would probably be a light punishment. After listening to the host's chatter, the system nodded in agreement. She was really self-aware. After dealing with some relatives of the Bai family, Yu Xiaoyun held a blue and white porcelain teacup and lay on an antique mahogany chair. He was resting with his eyes half closed. He was too tired during this period. But he never showed his emotions, and no one saw his anxiety. Chen San sorted out all the property documents of the Bai family and put them on the table, waiting for Yu Xiaoyun to look through. He looked at Yu Xiaoyun with some awe. After so many years of enduring, he actually destroyed a giant like the Bai family and took it for his own use. Yu Xiaoyun's reputation had spread out. And after taking the Bai family into his hands, he didn't have the habit of showing off at all. Instead, he began to eliminate those that could make a lot of money but were unusually dark. He planned to completely change his style so that the brothers who fought for him could have a good old age. Chen Shan used to be a tyrant in the underworld. He followed Yu Xiaoyun to repay the favor of saving his life. But now, he was completely convinced. Yu Xiaoyun suddenly opened his eyes. Those eyes that were as gentle as spring water were now so cold that people didn't dare to look at them directly. Chen Shan knew that he had crossed the line. Yu Xiaoyun hated people sneaking glances at him the most. Because he was too good-looking when he was young, he had seen too many of these disgusting peeping eyes. As a result, he didn't have a good impression of any peeping eyes. Chen Shan quickly lowered his head and softly reported the progress of some affairs. Yu Xiaoyun looked at him calmly, then picked up the teacup and took a sip. The Bai family was a rich family after all. Eating, drinking, playing, and rotting was one thing. However, in terms of etiquette, eating and drinking, and the nurturing of the children of great families, they were exceptionally elegant and noble. Yu Xiaoyun, who had grown up in the Bai family and received the best training, had completely inherited the extravagance, nobility, and elegance of the Bai family. Yu Xiaoyun hummed in agreement. I'll leave the rest of the chores to you guys. I need to rest for 2 days. Chen Shan immediately agreed. Then, he hugged a large stack of complicated documents and was about to leave. However, he heard Yu Xiaoyun's soft voice. Is that child still there? Wei Wei Bai, who had just turned 18, was so autistic that she was worse than a child. In Yu Xiaoyun's eyes, he was really a child. Chen Shan stopped in his tracks, and his eyes widened in shock. Because Yu Xiaoyun had never used such a tone to ask about others. Especially that person from the Bai family. However, Chen Shan, who had experienced all kinds of dirty and dark things, had a change of mind. Could it be that she had taken a fancy to that Bai family child? Even though he was mentally retarded, he still felt that she was beautiful and exquisite when he glanced at her occasionally. She was a young lady raised by the Bai family. Although she was conservative and bullied, she did not lack food and drink, and she did not need to work hard. Of course, she was fair and delicate. Like a Chinese daughter flower. Chen Shan looked down on this kind of girl from the bottom of his heart. She was thin and miserable. She was not interesting at all. Fast to read / fast to txt download fast to read on. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the fast, comma. Chapter 26-28. But maybe young master you liked this kind of thing. After all, for so many years, young master Yu was no different from a monk or a eunuch. Not only was he lustful, but he was also afraid that his boss had a problem in that aspect. Now, he was actually interested in a certain girl. Chen Shan was happier than Yu Xiaoyun. He immediately said, "Yes, I heard from the people watching below that she was squatting in the rain. She looked so fucking pitiful." It seemed that his tone was too excited and enthusiastic. Yu Xiaoyun's originally calm eyes had a trace of strange fluctuation. He turned his head and looked at Chen Shan coldly and calmly. "Do you like her?" It was so calm that it was close to a questioning tone. It made people shudder. Chen Shan jumped up like a plucked chicken and said, "I don't like her, of course I don't like her." This was interesting, right? It was definitely interesting. If it wasn't, what was with this tone? It was so cold that it made people's bones feel cold. Chen Shan immediately hugged the document and said with his head lowered, "Then I'll go take care of business first." After saying that, he ran away in a hurry. Yu Xiaoyun also felt that his tone was a little too harsh. He was probably too tired. He couldn't control his temper. There was a trace of forbearance in Yu Xiaoyun's eyes. Then, he directly leaned out. His delicate white porcelain fingers held the lid of the teacup and gently scraped the foam. The rain outside was getting heavier and heavier. Yu Xiaoyun glanced at the window coldly. Then, he closed his eyes indifferently. It was so good to sit in the big study that symbolized power in the Bai family, sit on the old master's favorite antique thick wooden chair, and drink the best tea. Although the taste was average in his mouth, he couldn't resist the taste of power. Therefore, Yu Xiaoyun took another sip indifferently. The smoke from the tea clouded his eyes. There was a trace of coldness in the gentleness. It was as beautiful as the mist in the distant mountains. The more Chen Shan thought about it, the more he felt that Yu Xiaoyun and Wei Bai had something going on. Otherwise, why would Yu Xiaoyun, who had always been as slow as a pig in this aspect, ask about Wei Bai for no reason? He must have liked her. No matter what it was 29. It was time to break the first time. Yu Xiaoyun was so clean that there was no smoke or fire in him, which made these big old men feel extremely uncomfortable. Every time they had a meeting or got together, the group of rough men had all washed themselves clean. They were even wearing suits, ties, and white socks. Those who didn't know would think that they were married men who were going to contribute to the people. Those who knew their identities thought that they were going to attend someone's funeral. But looking at the clean Yu Xiaoyun, they didn't dare to expose their smelly feet and smell him. When everyone rolled up their sleeves to eat hot pot in private, drank alcohol, and peed on the streets, they all discussed the reason. It must be because young Master Yu didn't have a woman, that's why he didn't have a woman. Who had been eating vegetarian food all year round, and his eyes had never shifted to any woman. Someone with a bit of popularity. If he could have another woman to control Yu Xiaoyun, he would definitely be like this group of old men. Instead of becoming immortals, he would become a real man. Therefore, whenever they saw Yu Xiaoyun take a fancy to a certain woman, they would be shocked. Chen Shan was very excited. What was wrong with the Bai family? That mentally retarded child of the Bai family was pitiful. From the beginning to the end, she had been bullied by the Bai family until she went crazy. Her fingers were clean, and there was no smell of blood. Her eyes were also clean, and there was no calculation in them. For people like Qin Shan who lived on the edge of a knife, this kind of person was worth worrying about. After all, she didn't even know how to kill a chicken. How could he expect her to suddenly become violent and kill people? / Fast, comma. Chapter 26-29. Although she was mentally retarded, it was fine as long as Yu Xiaoyun liked her. It was probably because the Bai family was mentally retarded. Yu Xiaoyun was too embarrassed to say that he liked her, but he couldn't bear to let her go. He was just thinking of ways to torment the little girl. Qin Shan was enlightened and directly ordered someone to do it. Soon, someone came to Wei Wei Bai. It was the maids. Several of them dragged Wei Wei Bai, like a bully kidnapping a woman. The maids didn't want to do this. But Wei Wei Bai hugged the branches and leaves of the flowers tightly and looked at them pitifully. She would rather be drenched in the rain than leave this place. Although it was summer, her brain was already weak from being drenched like this. If she had a high fever, she would probably be even more stupid. The maids had no choice but to drag her away. Anyway, with this small body, they could just carry her and run. But in private, Yu Xiaoyun was the dream lover of all women. He actually liked such a petite girl. It was really unexpected and shocking. Anyway, under Qin Shan's big mouth, everyone knew that Yu Xiaoyun liked the little mentally retarded of the Bai family. Then, from liking the little mentally retarded, in fact, he had a crush on the little mentally retarded for many years, to destroying the Bai family to be with the little mentally retarded, it was really a romantic rumor. Just as the parties involved didn't know. Everyone knew. Yu Xiaoyun closed his eyes and took a nap in the study. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. His face was pale and he was sweating. He seemed to have had a nightmare. Seeing himself sitting on the chair, he frowned and slowly got up. He had only slept for 2 to 3 hours for several days. As expected, he couldn't hold on. Yu Xiaoyun reached out and rubbed his sore eyebrows. Then, he picked up his coat and put it on before walking out. The best room in the Bai family had been cleaned and tidied up. It was all the style that Yu Xiaoyun liked. The white and gray decoration style, simple and comfortable furniture, and a low bed. There were also bookshelves that reached the ceiling. He opened the door. Because his eyes were too tired, he didn't pay much attention to his surroundings. He even ignored the small figure curled up beside the bed. Yu Xiaoyun reached out to take off his coat and threw it casually. Then it was a white shirt, pants, and watch. He didn't look as neat and elegant as he did on the outside. Her long, fair legs stepped on the messy clothes on the floor and walked directly into the bathroom. The bathroom door was open. In the hazy steam, the man had his back to the door. His back was as fair as jade, and his muscles were firm and smooth. His figure was on the thin side, and he didn't feel bloated even after taking off his clothes. However, one could see the hidden strength under the smooth lines of his muscles. Amidst the pitter-patter of the water, Yu Xiaoyun was expressionless as he was showered with hot water. The water slid past the side of his delicate face, down to his chin, and then to his ankles. Her usual elegance was nowhere to be seen. On the contrary, he was somewhat cold and gloomy. His dejected temperament made him look somewhat dangerous. Yu Xiaoyun turned off the shower, grabbed a clean white towel, and walked out of the door naked. However, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. A pair of pure and innocent eyes looked at him just like that. She sat on the other side of the bed. The bed was very low, and her hands just happened to be placed horizontally on the gray mattress. Her head of black hair was spread out a little on the bed. Her clear and undistracted eyes moved from his face to his chest. Then to his abdomen. Yu Xiaoyun's fingers that were wiping his hair froze. No one had ever suddenly appeared in his room. So he didn't expect to see her for a moment. Wei Wei Bai's eyes fell on him so innocently. Her expression didn't change. Yu Xiaoyun stiffened a little. Then, he slowly took a few deep breaths, turned around, grabbed a bathrobe, and casually put it on himself. Yu Xiaoyun's elegant mist-like elegance was destroyed by a trace of restlessness. He walked over to the bed without hesitation and reached out to grab her clothes. However, he found that she was actually wearing his shirt. She wasn't wearing pants yet. She was so petite that even if she was squatting, he could see her pale ankles that were so pale that he could see the light green meridians. For the first time, Yu Xiaoyun was a little flustered. The scene was so unexpected that he didn't know how to deal with it. Out of sight, out of mind, he didn't even ask how she appeared. He directly threw her at the door. Then he said coldly, "Get lost." After saying that, he slammed the door. Wei Wei Bai squatted at the door with a blank expression. The kitten that she begged for was thrown away just like that. Bleak, pitiful, miserable. The song "Arrowing You" was her background music. The system said, "Don't worry, the target has a bad temper. She'll be obedient after you torture her." He felt that he was also bad. In the past, when he saw the male lead being tortured, he would cry. Now, he was expressionlessly advising the host to torture the male lead. Wei Wei Bai squatted at the door and was silent for a long time. Suddenly, she exclaimed, "Nice body. Good skin. Long legs too. Pleasing to the eye." The system. The download the at https://m, Sashu. Calm. Chapter 26:30. The summer thunderstorm lasted for a long time. When night came, the storm had not stopped. The air was cold and steamy. Yu Xiaoyun had already changed into Chinese-style clothes. The silk black trousers and top were as soft as flowing water. These were his home clothes. Seeing that it was almost time for dinner, he got up with an elegant expression and planned to go out to instruct the servants to send dinner to the room. He liked quiet places. If it were not for business and work, he would usually prefer to stay at home. The Bai family was a place he was used to living in, because he was unwilling to change his habits. And he chose the largest room because it had a balcony that allowed him to see the scenery in the Love Garden. The lotus flowers in the Love Garden were not trimmed, and some of the lotus flowers were abnormally tall. There were even lotus leaves that were taller than a person's head. Every time he passed by the lotus pond, the lotus flowers were up to his shoulders. Yu Xiaoyun opened the door, and something warm and soft hit his leg. He wanted to avoid it, but he couldn't help but lower his head. His eyes met a pair of sleepy round eyes. The day's mist in those eyes lit up when they saw him, dispelling the mist and revealing traces of light. That expectant and cute look made Yu Xiaoyun look at her indifferently. But his face had always been very deceptive. Even if it was cold, it still made people feel that he was very gentle. So Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly for a while before lowering her head. Under her thick black hair, the tips of her ears that popped out from the hair slowly turned red. Yu Xiaoyun's gentle eyes couldn't help but narrow. His gaze fell on her slender but exceptionally beautiful legs. Her skin was too delicate, pale to the point of being sick. But it was like the most delicate white flower, shockingly beautiful. Then he raised his head as if nothing had happened, and his tone was neither cold nor indifferent. "Why are you still here?" Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled, and her beautiful eyes glanced at him, but she did not answer. Yu Xiaoyun did not expect a mentally handicapped person to be able to understand the meaning of his words. If it were anyone else who heard him ask this, their words would be like driving them away. They would have left long ago. A few strands of cold rain blew in. Yu Xiaoyun looked at the heavy rain outside the long corridor, his eyes cold. She seemed to feel cold too. She grabbed the hem of her wide shirt and tried to pull it down. After all, it had been raining outside. Because it was decorated in a Chinese style, there was a long corridor outside the door, and the long corridor faced the garden outside without any barriers. The cold rain was so heavy that it could splash into the Chinese-style long corridor. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her indifferently. He could only see the ends of her hair and ears as she lowered her head. Then, he took a few steps back. Without support, she fell directly into the room. Yu Xiaoyun gracefully turned around, and the young girl had already fallen to the ground in a daze. The carpet was thick, and was. Yu Xiaoyun, you ignored Yu Xiaoyun. Bai Weiwei was shocked. She immediately stood up and was about to follow. She saw the man in front of her slightly tilting his face. His eyes, which were as gentle as the spring breeze, tightened a little. He seemed to be unhappy that she had caught up. Yu Xiaoyun's gaze swept across her long hair casually. Because of the rain, a few strands of hair were wet and stuck to her pale cheeks. The girl was too young and delicate. The wide shirt could not cover anything. From her finely carved white collarbone to her legs under the shirt, they were all shockingly white. The only bright color on her body was her lips. Yu Xiaoyun's gaze fell on her lips for a long time before he looked away as if nothing had happened. Then he walked forward. But Bai Weiwei ignored the warning and seemed to want to follow him in a panic. Before she could take 2 steps, the door was closed. Weiwei Bai almost bumped into the door. She was locked in the room. Address of the full text: https://www.sashu.com. Download address of the full text: https://www.sashu.com. Read on the phone: https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 2631. Weiwei Bai lowered her head and silently swallowed her food. On the other side of Wang Walli's table was a calm Yu Xiaoyun. Although his expression was cold, his eyes were unusually gentle. This gentleness was innate. It had nothing to do with emotions. In particular, the quieter he was, the warmer his eyes, which were like the spring water and the breeze, made people feel warm. Yu Xiaoyun held a pair of mahogany chopsticks and calmly picked up a piece of vegetable and put it into his mouth with small mouthfuls of rice. When he ate, there was no sound at all. Even the movement of his lips was so subtle that it was almost impossible to see. Weiwei Bai said to the system, "It's easy to get gastric problems when eating with this kind of person." She couldn't imagine everyone eating the Mandarin duck pot with their sleeves rolled up and their heads full of joy. Seeing Yu Xiaoyun eating was similar to becoming a deity. If a mortal were to be placed with him, they would doubt their life. The system said, "Pretentious idiot, just torture him." Weiwei Bai. Why did she feel that her system, one is marked by the company one keeps? Very good. Her system was finally of one mind with her. Although Weiwei Bai didn't make a sound when she ate, it was indeed a fearful and careful way of eating. It had nothing to do with elegance. Instead, it looked very pitiful. Even Yu Xiaoyun couldn't help but look up and stare at her for a while. He found that she was even more nervous. Her hand that was holding the chopsticks was even trembling. She was afraid of him, but she was trying to get close to him. Yu Xiaoyun calmly analyzed her movements and emotions. But he found that her emotions were too straightforward. If it was someone else, he would wonder if they were deliberately acting. But for a person who was almost mute since she was young. Even for a child who was abused until she grew up. This kind of pitiful fear was the most genuine. But compared to other people saying that she was mentally retarded. She shouldn't be stupid. It was just that she was too close to herself, and her development was delayed, which caused her to look like a mentally retarded person. But knowing how to follow him closely, knowing that he was the one who could control her life, was also a sign of intelligence. If there was a good psychologist, if he continued to guide her, there should be a chance for her to fully recover. Yu Xiaoyun thought about a lot of things in an instant. Then, he slowly realized why he was analyzing her so much. He even ate at the same table as her. If it wasn't necessary, he almost never sat at the same table with others. However, Wei Bai raised her head timidly. When she looked at people with her round and misty eyes, she looked like a weak little animal. Yu Xiaoyun was stunned by her gaze. There seemed to be something emerging from the tip of his heart. It was an itchy feeling, like a strange fluctuation of emotions. His gentle features were even more beautiful and delicate. Then, he used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of meat and put it in her bowl. Wei Bai's watery eyes stared blankly at the meat in her bowl. Yu Xiaoyun smiled. Let's eat. Bai Wei pursed her lips, the only bright red color. When she pursed her lips, it was like a gorgeous flower bud was tightly closed. Yu Xiaoyun's gaze once again stopped on her lips. What a beautiful color. He thought absent-mindedly, it was not a good thing to be young and unparalleled. Wei Bai lowered her head and carefully ate her meal. Then, she put the meat he gave her into her mouth. As if she was eating some delicacy, her eyes curved, and a silly smile appeared on her tender face. She looked exceptionally cute. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes darkened. Then, he looked away indifferently and threw the chopsticks in his hand on the ground. It was stained with the smell of meat. It was dirty. Slash. Chapter 2632. Wei Bai was shocked by the sound of chopsticks falling to the ground. She felt safe just now, but the smile on her face was gone. Even the meat in her mouth was neither up nor down. She didn't know if she should swallow it. Yu Xiaoyun still had that calm expression on his face. He said in a low voice, "You can understand my words and sense my emotions. You don't even dare to eat when I throw my chopsticks. So are you pretending to be stupid on purpose?" Wei Bai's fingers trembled, but she didn't know what he was talking about. There was confusion and fear in her eyes. This kind of fear in her eyes. It made Yu Xiaoyun feel that he had committed a heinous crime. Although there were people who would look at him with this kind of gaze. But there was no one who was so soft and harmless. His gaze fell on her fingers. Her fair and tender fingertips were pressing on the chopsticks so hard that they turned white. It was as if as long as he questioned more, she was about to cry. Yu Xiaoyun suddenly lost the mood to bully her. He had been in a bad mood recently. When he saw Wei Bai, a sense of irritation surged in his heart. He wanted to bully her to vent his anger. But after bullying her, he felt that she was pitiful. When did he feel sympathy for a person? Yu Xiaoyun stood up and was not in the mood to eat. No one is tying you up. Leave after eating and don't come back in the future. She wasn't really autistic. She was just a self-enclosed little idiot. He was sure that she could understand his words. It was rare for Yu Xiaoyun to be kind, so he didn't really sell her out. Of course, the shrinking of the dark business was also a reason. He left the dining table and walked past the antique Chinese-style screen. His slender figure was reflected on the screen, bringing with it a faint shadow. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything after he left. It was impossible to leave. How could he leave when his favorability was only 5? Once he left, it would be difficult to come back. After all, the Bai family was now guarded like an iron bucket. If a person walked within a kilometer of this place, they would be monitored. If they walked within 10 meters without permission, they would definitely die. Because Yu Xiaoyun was too swift and decisive, his reputation was too resounding. After destroying the Bai family, he even threatened the interests of those dark forces. How could he not kill him? Although Yu Xiaoyun hardly went out now, everything was settled here. Living in the Bai family was not only comfortable, but also safe. As for whether Wei Wei Bai really left, it was none of his business. So many people were staring at the Bai family's door, and anyone who went out could die. With Wei Wei Bai's looks, it was unlikely that she would die. More likely, he would be caught and sold. Perhaps he would see this retarded canary in some big boss's house in the future. Yu Xiaoyun thought coldly. The rocking chair in the room was filled with books that he had casually placed. This was a rare copy of the ancient text. The Bai family had raised him too well. If it wasn't for the fact that they wanted to kill him, he might have let those people from the Bai family go. Yu Xiaoyun didn't really want to exterminate the entire Bai family. But that crazy woman, Bai Yanlan, forced him to take this difficult path. When that crazy woman killed the successor of the Bai family for him, Yu Xiaoyun knew that it didn't matter what he thought. If old Master Bai found out, he would be implicated in this matter. Then he would be the first person to be abandoned and obliterated. Yu Xiaoyun originally wanted to take it slow, but in the end, he took too big a step. He had attracted so much trouble. He sat back on the rocking chair and picked up the ancient book. Looking at the complicated and beautiful traditional words on it, the anxiety in his eyes lessened a little. Download to read on your phone. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 2633. Maybe he was too tired. He slowly closed his eyes and his breathing gradually became even. He didn't care about the other pitiful and helpless kitten in the room at all. The nightmare came unexpectedly, and it was natural. Yu Xiaoyun saw himself standing outside a dilapidated iron door. He listened to the kidnappers cursing inside. "Damn little brat, if you cry again, I'll kill you." Hasn't the Bai family responded yet? Did they agree to give up the recent offshore project? Another bandit sneered. How can it be so easy to give up? We should kill one of them and send the corpse over. Only then will it be a deterrent. Was the Bai family easy to get along with? Who didn't know how dirty the Bai family was in private? They were cold-hearted. We kidnapped their biological son and an adopted son. Let's kill the adopted son first. The words were full of killing intent, and the hoarse and vulgar cursing voice sounded again. Yu Xiaoyun stood calmly outside the door. His surroundings were dark. Only this door gave off a gloomy light of despair. But it was exceptionally terrifying. It didn't seem safer because of a little light. It was more like the entrance of the devil. Once he stepped in, he would be doomed. Yu Xiaoyun thought of his psychiatrist who kept repeating that if he wanted to overcome his mental illness, then he had to face it repeatedly. Yu Xiaoyun knew that this was a desensitization treatment. So he only hesitated for a moment, but he didn't give himself room to regret, nor did he condone his fear and retreat. He pushed open the creaking and extremely dark iron door. Then he slowly stepped in. Then he saw a petite child huddled in the corner. Another child about the same age was crying miserably. A few bandits looked fierce. Let's kill the adopted son first. The Bai family looked like. It was the one with the surname Yu. Although it was adopted, everyone knew that the Bai family also regarded it as their own. So after killing the adopted son, there was still room for negotiation with the biological child in their hands. Yu Xiaoyun slowly walked to the child in the corner. This corner was darker than anywhere else. It was as if the endless shadows outside were gathered here. The child's dirty and messy black hair draped over his forehead, covering most of his face. Yu Xiaoyun stood beside him expressionlessly, leaning against the wall. His shadow was also elongated. Strangely, his shadow was abnormally dark. It was as dark as the child in the corner. The bandit suddenly asked, "By the way, which one is the adopted son?" Another bandit said, "Boss went to negotiate. He only has the photos in his hands." "Bandit, I think the one who isn't dressed well is the adopted son." They could only rely on this judgment, because he did not have any information or photos with him. But the two children were dressed similarly. The bandit was furious. "How do you choose? I think it's all the same. Who is Yu Xiaoyun?" At their feet, the child who was crying and beaten miserably suddenly had a ferocious look on his face. He pointed to the child in the corner and shouted, "He is Yu Xiaoyun, a dog raised by our Bai family." The child in the corner trembled, but did not make a sound. The bandit didn't think too much about it. He walked to the corner and was about to grab the child. Yu Xiaoyun saw the child raise his head slightly, revealing his delicate and fragile chin. His thin lips slowly cracked into a strange arc. "No, I'm Bai Yun, not Yu Xiaoyun." "He's Yu Xiaoyun. Have you seen his clothes? We're wearing the school uniform of a private aristocrat. His name is embroidered on the back of his clothes." /fast full text / fast download / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the fast. Chapter 2634. Bai Yun shouted hysterically, "No, we just changed our clothes. My clothes are dirty. He changed them for me." The smile on the child's face grew wider and wider. Like a strange shadow, he revealed a devil's smile. The child said slowly, "Yu Xiaoyun, stop pretending. You're a dog raised by the Bai family." After saying this, inside the dark iron door, the smell of blood filled the air. The bandit's face turned into a twisted and strange shadow that kept elongating. The shadow covered the warehouse terrifyingly. It kept making sharp sounds. "You're a dog of the Bai family, a dog of the Bai family." Under the sound was a bloody and twisted scene. This scene was obviously disgusting. But Yu Xiaoyun saw the child in the corner stand up coldly. He finally raised his eyes. That pair of beautiful and gentle eyes that were like a spring breeze looked at him affectionately. "What's wrong? Are you ashamed of killing a member of the Bai family? You just want to live. Don't feel guilty." Yu Xiaoyun stood where he was, wanting to escape. But he found that those shadows had already caught him. They made him unable to move. The black shadow began to be dyed with bloody red. It was like a black cloth that was soaked in a red river and flowed up. The world of red and black was filled with the smell of decay. The child in the corner grew bigger and bigger. In the end, he became the same as Yu Xiaoyun. As if he was looking at a mirror, Yu Xiaoyun looked at himself and revealed a strange smile. "What are you pretending for, hypocrite? Do you think that by pretending to be elegant and beautiful, you can wash away the blood on your hands and the smell of decay on your body? Or do you think that you're really a noble young master of a wealthy family?" That eerie smile of his own. Step by step, he walked over and pressed his forehead against his forehead. He slowly opened his thin red lips. No matter how good you pretend, you're just a butcher with bloody hands. How do you feel about killing your best friend?" Bai Yun was the only person in the Bai family who had some kindness to him. But he changed his clothes for him and pushed Bai Yun to his death. This nightmare was still as boundless as ever. Yu Xiaoyun couldn't help but retort hoarsely. He said I was a dog and wanted to kill me. So, what was wrong with him killing Bai Yun? That strange self of his smiled slowly. Oh, but when you changed his clothes, he was still thinking of running away with you. He didn't scold you at all. You are a selfish, vicious, and disgusting person. Vicious and disgusting. These words cut deep into his bones. The nightmare made him almost unable to breathe. The boundless darkness surged over with blood. Year after year, he was stained with blood and dark schemes to seize power. They all turned into ferocious ghost faces, wanting to completely obliterate him in the nightmare. Suddenly, there was some kind of heavy pressure that made him feel even more uncomfortable. However, this heavy pressure was accompanied by a warm temperature. Instead of the endless nightmare, the cold of the terrifying darkness. Yu Xiaoyun's eyelashes trembled violently, and his eyelids trembled as well. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes. Break free from a terrible nightmare. However, the fear in his heart still did not subside. Then, he lowered his head and saw the young girl lying on his chest. The rocking chair creaked. Her face was pressed against his chest. Her big eyes were pure and filled with worry. It was as if she knew that he was in pain. Her lips moved, and her voice was delicate and choppy. Don't be afraid. Yu Xiaoyun wanted to say that there was nothing to be afraid of. However, he found that the fingertips of his hand on the armrest were trembling non-stop. The nightmare was too long, and he had been having it for so many years. Every time he woke up, the room was cold. Every time, he had to calm down for a long time before he could calmly walk out of the room to face others again. This was also the reason why he did not let anyone get close to him. He would not let the people of Bill see such a pathetic side of him. However, when he saw Wei Wei Bai's worried eyes, he only breathed slowly a few times and found his fear and discomfort. It was slowly disappearing. One more person seemed to be nothing. After all, she was just a little fool who had a slow development. Even if she saw this side of him, she couldn't go out and gossip. Yu Xiaoyun's anxious and crazy heart calmed down. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 8. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m.sashu.com/. Chapter 2635. Yu Xiaoyun's eyelashes drooped, covering the light in his eyes. He suppressed his chaotic breathing and wanted to push away the girl who was like a kitten on top of him. But the next second, she reached into her pocket and dug around. Then, she carefully took out a small piece of meat. The new chef didn't understand Yu Xiaoyun's taste. Except for 1 or 2 vegetarian dishes, the rest of the dinner was meat. Even the soup was bone soup. It was not something he would eat. He just wanted to fire the chef. Bai Weiwei carefully held the cute little meat patty in her hands, her big eyes full of cautious longing. He threw away his chopsticks. So she thought he would be hungry if he didn't eat. Yu Xiaoyun's beautiful and delicate face was still as calm as a breeze. He reached out and touched her fingertips, but he didn't take her meat patty. Instead, he followed the back of her hand and kept moving up. In the end, his slender and fair fingers touched her chin. This slight touch made her eyes turn sluggish. The man elegantly sat up with one hand on the armrest. She sat on his lap, her slender legs hanging by the side of the chair like a fragile butterfly. There was a kind of morbid beauty. Yu Xiaoyun's fingers touched her chin unhurriedly. It was like touching a small animal. It was heartless, but there was a trace of strange warmth. I don't eat this. Throw it away. His voice was soft and cold. Then Yu Xiaoyun recovered his cold and elegant demeanor. His fingers moved down and grabbed her collar. His other hand also wrapped around her waist. Her fragile and slender waist made his fingertips pause, but in the next moment, he pinched harder. Then, he put her on the carpet. Yu Xiaoyun unhurriedly tidied up the wrinkles on his clothes. Wei Wei Bai was confused. She reached out and touched her waist. It hurt. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes fell on her movements. After a few seconds, he returned to normal and walked forward. Wei Wei Bai saw him leave and wanted to stand up, but she hesitated because he was too cold. She sat on the carpet in a daze for a long time. Then, she carefully pinched the meat patty and lowered her head to eat it. He couldn't bear to waste items. Wei Wei Bai finished eating. Then, he heard a notification. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 13. She didn't look at the screen. Instead, she leaned against the foot of the chair and hugged her legs. It was as if this was the position she was most used to. This pose gave her a false sense of security. On the other side of the screen, Yu Xiaoyun paused for a while before turning to leave. The chef was not fired, but he was informed. There were more vegetarian dishes than meat dishes. And the soup had to be vegetarian. A vegetarian monk, this was Yu Xiaoyun's impression of him. However, she didn't know if it was because Yu Xiaoyun was too busy to chase her away. Anyway, no one would throw her out. He even felt that it was natural for her to appear in Yu Xiaoyun's room. Occasionally, there would even be men who would come to report some problems, and they would look at her with a strange and passionate gaze. This made Wei Wei Bai hide herself even deeper in the corner, not even daring to raise her head. He seemed to be frightened. Yu Xiaoyun seemed to have never noticed her. He didn't chase her away, nor did he let her eat at the table. But he didn't talk to her much. Occasionally, he would only look at her from afar. It didn't matter if he saw her squatting in the corner. The indifference in it. There was a hair-raising sense of coldness. It seemed that she was treated as a decoration in the room. Chapter 2636. She did not care, although she did not ignore it, she did not care. Wei Wei Bai did not protest or speak. Other than the necessary physiological needs, she did not move at all. She just huddled in a corner. Oh right, the carpet in this corner was the thickest and softest. Wei Wei Bai deliberately chose it. She was not actually in a daze. After all, there were hundreds of thousands of novels waiting for her in the system's database. There were tens of thousands of movies to read. When necessary, she could even use her spirit to play games with the system. Although it was silent, it was unusually exciting. After a few days like this, the system suddenly said, "I seem to smell something." Wei Wei Bai lowered her head, dark circles under her eyes as she read, "A dog man's bloody pursuit of his wife." She reached the key part. The dog man knelt down and hugged the female lead's thigh with tears and snot. "I was wrong, Jade Flower, please forgive me." "Dog Pillar, it's too late, I have a baby with Iron Egg next door." It was a wonderful face-slapping scene. It was so infectious that Wei Wei Bai had to desperately control her facial expression to not reveal a lecherous smile. She casually answered the system, "Am I not brewing the smell to attract that dog Yu Xiaoyun's bee?" Just as she was about to see the female lead kick Dog Pillar away, then fall down and have a miscarriage. A pair of feet appeared in Wei Wei Bai's line of sight. Wearing black cloth shoes, the shoes were embroidered with faint silver patterns that were almost invisible. It was a beautiful bamboo. She was shocked and immediately put away the image of Iron Egg, Jade Flower, and Dog Pillar in her mind. Then, as if her eyes were covered with mist, she slowly looked up. Beautiful unreserved navy blue silk pants, smooth and soft, designed in a more modern style of tang suit, were also of the same color. This man liked Chinese things. Even his every move was elegant and reserved in the style of the East. Finally, her eyes landed on Yu Xiaoyun's face. Yu Xiaoyun's expression was still indifferent, there was no fluctuation in his emotions. His pair of gentle eyes, however, had a strange sense of tension. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, as if she could not bear his serious gaze. Finally, the voice of the man above him was incomparably calm. "How long has it been since you bathed?" Wei Wei Bai lowered her head. Her fingernails on her knees were white. It seemed that his questioning tone made her very uncomfortable. And she didn't seem to understand the meaning of this sentence. Yu Xiaoyun silently stared at the top of her messy and thick hair. Her extremely messy hair had not been combed and just hung messily. Her face was completely covered, only revealing those tender red lips and a little bit of snow white below her chin. It was so beautiful that it was eroding. Yu Xiaoyun suddenly bent down and reached out to grab her arm. He lifted her up easily and then dragged her forward. Wei Wei Bai stumbled after him. Even though he was staggering, he had no intention of resisting. He went to the bathroom. The bathroom was Western style and the bathtub was big. He asked her to stand aside expressionlessly. Then, he turned on the hot water and let it flow into the bathtub. Yu Xiaoyun rolled up his sleeves, revealing his strong and fair arms. He then put his hands directly into the hot water to test the temperature of the water. He made sure that the temperature of the water was right. He turned around and looked at the girl who was standing there in a daze. It was rare for him to frown, as if he was troubled by something. "Do you know how to bathe by yourself?" Wei Wei Bai was about to take a step forward and nod. Yu Xiaoyun glanced at her. There was a deep and strange feeling in his eyes that made her feel uneasy. His thin lips curved, and he said as if he was troubled, "It seems that you don't know how to bathe, /." Chapter 2637. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. He had already reached out and pulled her over. The man's fingers were wet from the water. There was still the warmth of the water. In the next moment, Wei Wei Bai was pressed into the water by him, along with her clothes. He pressed on the shampoo expressionlessly, wet her hair, and quickly washed her hair. Her long black hair looked like an ink painting in the water. It was beautiful. It was just that it hadn't been washed for too many days. If he hadn't smelled it, she didn't know how long it would have been. Her wet clothes stuck to her body. Her black hair fell to both sides of her shoulders, and her slender white neck was exposed. A thin blush began to appear on her lowered face. She pursed her lips. Her body was tense, but she didn't dare to resist. Gradually, she seemed to know that he wouldn't hurt her, so her body relaxed. However, her face was still red. But she didn't see it. Yu Xiaoyun's gaze fell on her reddened skin. After a long time, he looked away. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai felt that her clothes were loose. She looked up in surprise. A trace of fear appeared in her eyes, as if she had been hurt. She immediately hugged herself and shrank into the water, staring at him with wide eyes. Yu Xiaoyun's fingers paused. But he didn't continue. His gaze fell on her back. Her flawless skin was covered with dark bruises and scars. Yu Xiaoyun stared at her skin and watched as she looked at him in fear. In the end, her skin and arms began to tremble. Where was the child who couldn't resist at all? Yu Xiaoyun looked at her silently for a while before letting go of her clothes. He didn't force her to take them off. Wei Wei Bai didn't heave a sigh of relief. Instead, she curled up in the water. Her chin and lips were submerged in the water, leaving only a pair of shockingly large eyes. It was as if he would hurt her. She was guarded. Yu Xiaoyun's affectionate and gentle eyes narrowed slightly with a hint of gloomy sharpness. He whispered, "Are you afraid of me?" Wei Wei Bai glared at him but didn't say anything. Yu Xiaoyun curled his thin lips and chuckled. What an ignorant little mute. He moved his body unhurriedly and dipped his fingers into the water as if he was testing the temperature of the water. In the warm water, she trembled non-stop, like a little bird that had lost its wings and was thrown to the ground. There was no space for her to dodge. Yu Xiaoyun's soft clothes fell into the water and were dragged vertically under the water. His long hair touched her long hair. Wei Wei Bai trembled but did not dare to resist. Yu Xiaoyun's voice became even gentler, and his gaze was still indifferent and elegant. "Don't be afraid, I won't harm you." When he said this, he seemed to have thought of something funny and couldn't help but reveal an evil smile. The last sentence was a lie. "Even if I hurt you, you wouldn't dare to say anything, right?" Wei Wei Bai was so scared that she closed her eyes. Her eyelashes trembled violently and her face turned pale. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her beautiful face, and the darkness in his eyes almost overflowed. Just when the poor little bird thought it was going to suffer, the man left. The cold air returned. Wei Wei Bai held her breath and waited for a while. Finally, she couldn't hold it in any longer and opened her eyes after exhaling. However, she saw that the man had already walked to the bathroom door. He opened the door without hesitation and walked out with his back facing her. // Chapter 2638. The door closed again. Wei Wei Bai reached out to touch her hair and then began to wash it. She didn't want to take a bath for so many days. Wasn't this a last resort to create more opportunities to get along? Wei Wei Bai called the system while washing. What was the follow-up of the dog man's bloody pursuit of his wife? The system smashed, blocked, suddenly disturbed. Yu Xiaoyun, who had walked out, stopped at the door. Then he reached out and slowly touched his forehead. His wet fingers were a bit cold. It made his eyes gradually calm down. Under the white light, the man still walked elegantly and left the bathroom step by step. But when he turned around the screen, the man reached out and gently pressed his slender fingertips against his lips, as if he was tasting something. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 15. Wei Wei Bai changed into the clothes the maid brought. It was also a Chinese silk home dress. If he wasn't going out, Yu Xiaoyun rarely wore Western clothes. He liked silk. Especially good silk. These were all frighteningly expensive fabrics. He liked to collect silk things, including old-fashioned clothes. Men and women were fine, as long as the color was special enough and the thing was worth buying. The clothes given to Wei Wei Bai were taken from his silk collection. A cheongsam. The begonia red cheongsam just happened to fit Wei Wei Bai's figure. Her waterfall-like black hair fell behind her, and the begonia red on her body was charming and gentle. It neutralized some of her timidity. On the contrary, it made this child who had just turned 18 years old look like a begonia red blooming on a branch. Delicate and light. The too stunning outfit made Yu Xiaoyun stunned for a while. For the first time, a strange restlessness surged in the heart of the man who liked to collect silk and even clothes. It seemed to be his bad habit of collecting women's silk clothes. It was all prepared for this moment. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 18. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, not knowing where the heat in his eyes came from. He didn't move. She did not dare to move. She felt that this uncle was staring at her as if he was staring at braised pork. Wei Wei Bai hesitated and took a step back, trying to distance herself from him. Yu Xiaoyun also woke up from his shock. His expression was somewhat tense, but he did not lose his composure. He glanced at the time. It was 11:00. This was Yu Xiaoyun's resting time. Therefore, he stood up, threw down the book in his hand, and prepared to sleep. On the other hand, Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief and took a few steps back. Then, she shrank back into her corner and sat on the soft carpet. She continued reading the novel about the bloody history of that man. The dog man was slapped in the face, his company went bankrupt, and he was whipped by the female lead. The plot of the story was really full of ups and downs, and it was extremely melodramatic. If this novel did not become popular, the heavens would not tolerate it. Wei Bai read a novel and fell asleep. He had earned enough favorable impression points today. In any case, the time was still to be determined. It didn't matter how long it would take. Let's slowly farm. The dog man, Yu Xiaoyun, should be sleeping on the big bed. She was curled up in the corner. Although it was soft, it was quite hard to sleep. No matter how hard it was, she still fell asleep with a big heart. Time passed by minute by minute. When the clock struck 1, the man on the big bed finally got up from the other side of the screen. His clothes were a little wrinkled, as if he had turned over and over. There were also a few strands of hair sticking up in his hair. The man stepped over the screen and saw a small figure curled up in the corner. It was indescribably pitiful. He did not have any sympathy. But she was wearing his treasured clothes and was curled up like this. When she woke up tomorrow, her clothes were basically useless. In fact, he could give her a lady's pajamas. There were so many maid's clothes that she could wear any one of them. But Yu Xiaoyun did not give her any. He vaguely knew the dark thoughts in his heart. But, the moment he saw her, his heart throbbed with amazement. It made him start to think that it would be great if he could treat her as silk and put her in a box in his treasure vault. It was an inexplicable thought. He snorted. Yu Xiaoyun walked in front of her. Darkness fell on most of his face, making the man who was usually as elegant as bamboo have a hint of gloomy ghost. Then he bent down and touched the cheongsam on her body with his fingers. Beautiful colors and silky fabric. Just like the skin on her neck, there was a kind of magic that made people crazy. Slash. Slash fast, comma. Chapter 2639. The man in the darkness moved his fingertips slightly downward. The girl made a soft murmur, as if she was a little uncomfortable. His fingertips stopped and didn't move again. He wasn't afraid that she would wake up, but just politely suppressed his impulsive touch. In the middle of the summer night, there was an ambiguous and hot aura rising. It made the man's breathing a little heavier. In the end, his hand just stopped on her collar. He felt the smooth touch of his collection, and the beautiful luster of the silk fabric under the faint halo shining under his fingertips. Yu Xiaoyun didn't know how long he stood there. His silent face was as frozen and expressionless as a white jade sculpture. He seemed to be testing her, moving down her back and finally touching her waist. She didn't wake up. After all, he had been on tenterhooks the entire day, staying in this corner. Once no one saw her at night, she could really rest. So she was so tired that it was not easy to wake up. She was stupid, but she could read people's expressions. She had some IQ, but it was like the intuition of a small animal, without the intelligence of a human. Yu Xiaoyun picked her up and slowly walked behind the screen. On the low bed, he put her on one side of the bed, and then he lay on the other side of the bed. The middle was especially far away. He even gave her a new quilt. Then he closed his eyes and prepared to sleep. This time, he didn't have nightmares. Perhaps he subconsciously felt that there was someone beside him, so he didn't expose his weakness of being tortured by nightmares. When Yu Xiaoyun woke up, he saw a petite figure in his arms. He woke up and stared at the top of her head for a long time. Then he pushed her away and got up to leave. After all, men always had some awkward physiological reactions in the morning. Even if most men had them. But young Master Yu couldn't bear to see his beastly side being seen. When he washed up, he stared at himself in the mirror. He didn't have the fierce gloominess after waking up. Instead, he was as elegant as ever. It was because there were no nightmares. So he forgave Wei Wei Bai for snuggling into his arms in the middle of the night. After washing his face, Yu Xiaoyun stared at his towel for a long time before he realized something. Then, his face darkened. He opened the door and went out, only to see a small figure curled up in the bedding. He walked over and lifted the blanket. Wei Wei Bai had just woken up when she saw Yu Xiaoyun's stormy face. What the hell? Did he find out that she had whipped him in his dream? In the end, Yu Xiaoyun took a few deep breaths before he finally asked word by word, "Have you brushed your teeth?" Wei Wei Bai, the system that had just woken up, was speechless. Wei Wei Bai's sluggishness caused Yu Xiaoyun to misunderstand. He had always been a clean freak. Seeing her acquiescence, his heart trembled. She had been here for so long, but she hadn't brushed her teeth. Wei Wei Bai saw that he had misunderstood, but she couldn't say that she had swiped it while she was in the toilet. After all, Yu Xiaoyun had more than one toothbrush in the bathroom. The maid kept a few new toothbrushes and an electric toothbrush every day. In the end, Yu Xiaoyun was a traditional old man. He followed the rules and used his own wooden toothbrush. She used an electric toothbrush. After using it, she would put it back where it was and replace it with a new one the next day. Then, when Yu Xiaoyun entered the bathroom and didn't see her toiletries, he thought that she hadn't brushed her teeth. Wei Wei Bai was about to explain. She had to maintain her persona and think of a way to make her words sound retarded. // Chapter 2640. This delay. Yu Xiaoyun had already carried her to the sink with a long face. Then he gave her a new wooden toothbrush and got the toothpaste ready. Then he said coldly, "Open your mouth." Wei Wei Bai, did he really think that her brain was plankton? No matter how well she acted as a retard, she wasn't that retarded. The girl looked up hesitantly and then looked at the toothbrush in his hand. She seemed to realize what he was going to do. A strange expression appeared on her face. Her misty eyes turned slightly. The girl, who should have been dull, now had a sense of quickness. She took a few steps forward, reached out her slender hand, and took the toothbrush in his hand. Then she turned around and took the spare bamboo-style mouthwash cup. This was all new. It was changed every day. The maid probably thought that Yu Xiaoyun was unusually clean. She couldn't wait to change the things he used every day. She turned her back to him, lowered her head, and began to brush her teeth expressionlessly. Her movements weren't big, but she was very familiar with it. She didn't look at the man behind her and his indescribable expression. Wei Wei Bai finished brushing her teeth. A towel had already appeared on her face. Yu Xiaoyun was standing behind her, his expression indifferent and calm. But the towel in his hand wanted to suffocate her. Her face was red from being wiped by him. Yu Xiaoyun seemed to feel that she was clean and let her go. Taking care of a retard was also a very challenging task for young Master Yu. Yu Xiaoyun put on his home clothes. He opened the wardrobe and saw the clothes that the maid had put in early in the morning. They were home clothes that were one size smaller. They were also silk, the fabric of his clothes that he was used to and liked. Last night, the bathroom was in a mess. In addition, he opened the collection and took out the cheongsam. It had already spread everywhere. Those who originally had doubts about the relationship between Wei Wei Bai and Yu Xiaoyun. They immediately changed their minds and completely believed that young Master Yu was finally moved. The maids and the people below immediately prepared all the women's clothes and sent them over. Even if Yu Xiaoyun didn't give any instructions. When Yu Xiaoyun saw it this morning, he didn't say anything. He had forgotten to let her change out of her cheongsam last night. Even a shirt would have been fine. When she woke up the next day, she couldn't even look at the cheongsam anymore. Yu Xiaoyun walked to the dining table. Wei Wei Bai followed behind him carefully, just like his little tail. He didn't stop her either, as if he had tacitly agreed to her following him. All traces of the Bai family had been cleaned up. Even the lotus flowers outside the garden were being tidied by the gardeners. He was worried that the bridge would be submerged and he wouldn't be able to see the road outside. After changing the Bai family's front door, they engraved the Yu family's door plate. This place was not called the Bai family. It was Yu Xiaoyun's Yu family. As for whether or not Love Garden needed to be renamed, Yu Xiaoyun didn't have time to worry about such a trivial matter. After the meal, he still had a big meeting to attend. It was the subordinates who followed him that needed to be redistributed. The dark business had to be abandoned. Therefore, some people would definitely not be able to eat well. To not disappoint this group of people, he also needed to take out a sufficient amount of compensation. If it wasn't for the sake of toppling the Bai family, he actually didn't want to lay out such a big path. He was too tired. Yu Xiaoyun didn't make a sound when he was eating. Wei Wei Bai didn't either. The two of them were quiet. One was elegant and indifferent, while the other was cautious. After the meal, he changed into a suit and got up to walk out. Fast to read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Fast to read the at https://m.sashu.com/fast, Chapter 2641. Wei Wei Bai immediately got up and followed him. Yu Xiaoyun ignored her and walked straight out of the room. He came to the corridor and walked towards the path. Wei Wei Bai hesitated when she stepped out of the room. But she still followed him. But when he walked on the path and was about to leave this place, a trace of panic appeared in her eyes. She walked slowly outside the corridor, but she didn't dare to follow him. That was the outside world. So she didn't dare to go. When Yu Xiaoyun was halfway there, he seemed to have thought of something and quietly turned back. The man's eyes were still affectionate, but there was no softness in them. He saw her clutching her home clothes with both hands. She seemed to be very frightened and looked at him pitifully. She was almost like an abandoned kitten. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her indifferently for a while. Then, he moved his tender and cold eyes away. Then, the man strode forward with his slender legs and continued to walk forward. Wei Wei Bai's face turned even paler. She tried to step out of the corridor. At first, her footsteps were hesitant. Gradually, she sped up and finally ran wildly. She saw him disappear at the end of the path. The girl's face was full of panic and fear. It was as if she had stepped into a strange world for the first time, and the only person she was familiar with was gone. She plunged under the lotus leaves and ran desperately out of the path. But she bumped into a warm embrace. The warm embrace had the faint, fresh scent of a man and a dry fragrance. She looked up in a daze and saw Yu Xiaoyun standing at the end of the path. He seemed to be waiting for something. He held a freshly lit cigarette in his hand. The hazy smoke blurred the false affection in his eyes. Instead, there was a hint of ghostly gloom. His eyes turned down and his tone was calm. "You'll suffer in the future if you act rashly. After saying that, he pushed her away and turned to walk forward. Wei Wei Bai didn't hesitate and continued to follow him. The place where the meeting was held was another secret place. It was the safest restaurant in the city. They had booked a private room in advance. The private room was very big. There were dozens of men, all of them calm and indifferent. When Yu Xiaoyun walked in, everyone stood up and bowed. These dozens of people were the backbone members under Yu Xiaoyun. Every single one of them had been through a reign of terror, bringing with them a baleful aura. Yu Xiaoyun calmly raised his hand, indicating for everyone to sit down. Then, he took a few steps forward, and everyone saw a small figure with a lowered head, long hair that reached her knees, and wearing casual clothes made of silk, walked in carefully while tugging on the corner of Yu Xiaoyun's suit. It was like a young sheep appearing in a pack of wolves. He was too immature. Instead, it made everyone unable to come back to their senses for a while. Such a big meeting, such a murderous scene to divide the spoils. Among so many terrifying men. A girl who looked like an underage girl appeared. It was too strange. Yu Xiaoyun sat in the main seat and held her arm. The man who had not touched her all this time pulled her into his arms. Wei Wei Bai sat on his lap. She was a little slow and felt that this position was too intimate. Just as she was about to resist, the man casually reached out and grabbed her waist. Then, he whispered in her ear, "Don't move." These words were cold and indifferent. There was no trace of affection in them. Wei Wei Bai was stunned and did not move. All the puzzled men at the scene understood the moment she sat on Yu Xiaoyun's lap, so they did not protest. /fast to read //fast to txt download fast to read on your phone, https://m, sashu. com/fast. Chapter 2642. After all, everyone tacitly agreed that Yu Xiaoyun's woman could participate in the meeting, which was also a form of respect for their boss. For the rest of the time, Yu Xiaoyun dealt with a lot of heavy matters with little effort. On the most difficult distribution of benefits. His way of dealing with it also satisfied many of his brothers. Yu Xiaoyun did not hesitate to use his own benefits to fill in the holes of some of his subordinates who had lost too many. Because the meeting was long. Wei Wei Bai was so tired that she couldn't hold on anymore. She leaned on his chest and narrowed her eyes in a daze. Like a cat taking a nap. If the rest of the people were curious about what Yu Xiaoyun's woman looked like at the beginning. After a long time, they didn't care anymore. After all, this kind of girl didn't look threatening at all. She was probably the kind of pet. No one took Wei Wei Bai seriously. Before the end of the meeting, Yu Xiaoyun realized that his hands were sweaty. All kinds of benefits were distributed, and it was an extremely difficult task to redivide the forces with the various subordinates. Although Yu Xiaoyun was sorting out this hell-level mission bit by bit, his body couldn't hold on any longer. It was more of a mental exhaustion. He was still expressionless and didn't show any emotions. But the eyelashes of the girl in his arms moved. She seemed to have noticed something and raised her clear but dull eyes to look at him blankly for a while. Then she carefully reached out and placed her hand on his arm, gently stroking his arm. It seemed to be comforting his irritated and tired mind. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes moved, but he didn't lower his head to look at Wei Wei Bai. Just like that, her gentle touch didn't attract anyone's attention. Yu Xiaoyun's expression was still indifferent and gentle, but that impatience gradually settled in his eyes. Instead, it made his eyes even more gentle and beautiful. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 20. After the meeting, everyone left one by one. Yu Xiaoyun watched everyone leave. He faintly lowered his eyes and saw Bai Weiwei nestled in his arms, nodding her head. She seemed to be too bored and sleepy. But her hand was still touching his arm. Yu Xiaoyun's expression softened. He reached out and held her fingers, pinching her weak fingertips in his hand. Then he ordered. Get someone to serve the dishes. During the meeting, no outsiders were allowed to enter. Therefore, she had no food to eat, not even a sip of water. Other than being safe and secretive, the best thing about this restaurant was that it was famous for its dishes. When Wei Wei Bai heard that there was food to eat, she was no longer sleepy. Her eyes lit up and she immediately sat up. Yu Xiaoyun also put her on the chair. As if he was looking at his favorite cat, he reached out and gently stroked her hair. Wait a little longer. Wei Wei Bai glanced at him uneasily. Yu Xiaoyun was like a roundworm in her stomach. He called the waitress here. Follow her, she'll take you to the bathroom. After all, such a long meeting was indeed inhumane. Wei Wei Bai didn't hold back either. She really couldn't hold it in. That long and smelly meeting made her feel suffocated. Yu Xiaoyun was too gentle. He couldn't wait to take care of everything. If it were up to her, these little bastards would all be brought up to beat the other side, and they would even give them benefits to make them satisfied. Was Yu Xiaoyun the boss? Why did he look more like a sucker? As she complained, she went to the bathroom. When she washed her hands, she couldn't help but show off to the system. If it were up to me, I would be better than Yu Xiaoyun as the boss. But she was a retard in this world. Side mission, that's right, you would definitely be better than that stupid monk as the boss. Wei Wei Bai touched her chin proudly. No matter what, I'm still managing a big company. I've also experienced so many worlds and seen so many big scenes. If it's a career, you might not be able to beat me. Mission, that's right, that's right. My Wei Wei is amazing. What's the point of having a man? Being the king of your career is your crown. Wei Wei Bai, although the praise sounded very good, was it an illusion? When did the system become so good? Wasn't her system the kind of young man who had a mocking face and spouted venom? That green tea bitch tone. That familiar voice. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Download read the full text. 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 Chapter 2643. Side mission, that's right, that's right. You're the best, la 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 la, Wei Wei Bai, enough, stop praising me. You're killing me. The system had just returned from stewing pork ribs for itself when it saw the side mission occupying its spot. It was chatting with the host. His life was already so difficult. His sense of existence was already so faint. Why did the side mission want to snatch such a faint sense of existence? It could only be the system who could chat with the host. The system burst into tears and took out a large fly swatter. It carefully approached the side mission, intending to swat it to death and be done with it. The side mission danced proudly. Come on, let's have some fun. We have to be ambitious. What's the big deal about being retarded? We've already played with the little white flower. Look at other hosts, they can fly around and destroy the harem on Earth with 300,000 savings. Look at you, you're such a good-for-nothing. Don't you feel embarrassed to eat the little white flower joke every day? Wei Wei Bai, no, the little white flower is my king. It's my favorite. Side mission, disfigurement. Wei Bai, that's right. My career is my dream. I'll immediately climb to the top of my career for you to see. System, host, you should have some integrity. It's just a face. Side mission activated. Host, please go out and make a call to tell the other party where you and the male lead are. Wei Bai, that's it. Side mission, it's just a small mission. Wei Bai, what's next? Side mission, I haven't thought about it yet. You finish it first. Wei Bai, so why are you so happy to agree with those idiotic remarks of the king of his career? Are you fucking kidding me? Did you come out early just to make me feel uncomfortable? You be *tch, side mission, if you fail the mission, you'll be disfigured. Your soul will be disfigured. Your soul will be disfigured together with the system. Do you have to say something important 3 times? Wei Bai shouted hoarsely, can't you be a little more creative? This punishment was used on the previous plane. Side quest, it's so useful. I want to use it a few times in every dimension in the future. In Wei Bai's mind, a terrifying and hateful old monster with a ferocious face and a bloody mouth suddenly appeared. It slowly grew its fangs and laughed, disfigure, disfigure, use it a few more times, use it a few more times. Wei Bai, nightmare. He wanted to die. Don't stop me. She was going to beat that little bitch to death. Wei Bai asked the system helplessly, can we kill it? The system could not get a side quest, so it put away the fly swatter helplessly. Not now. Its value has increased again recently. I need 5 million HP to kill it. Do your best for the mission. Wei Bai. What's wrong with smashing you? When did you become so gentle, humble, and adorable? The system said, I'll be disfigured if I don't complete the mission. Although it was just a face, it was still very important to think about. If the host could see him in the future, he would be in a disfigured state. Based on the host's preference for looks, there was no doubt that she would kick him away with a single kick. Wei Bai, you were so generous when I was disfigured. Now that it's our turn to be disfigured together, you're urging me to complete the mission. Suddenly, she wondered why the little bitch and the system did not go on a blind date. They were a match made in heaven. No matter what, face was still important. Wei Bai walked out of the bathroom and saw an old-fashioned telephone at the end of the wooden corridor. Although it was old-fashioned, it was just an antique shell. It could still be used. Wei Bai walked over expressionlessly and called the number given by the side quest. Crossover system, Adonis, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here, / crossover system, Adonis, come here. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here. Mobile reading crossover system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 2644. Then she didn't wait for the other party to say anything. She said calmly, Yu Xiaoyun is at the Cloud Restaurant. The Cloud Restaurant was where they were. Wei Bai hung up the phone, afraid that someone would see it, so she immediately turned and left. She had some doubts about the purpose of this mission in her heart, so she said, what kind of mission is this? Could it be a side mission? That little bastard's brain can't even think of a simple side mission. Without waiting for the system to speak, the side mission immediately reached out and pressed the system to open its face. This side mission is to let you complete the main storyline of your career. What's the point of relying on men? Rise, woman, your name is the sea in waves, every wave is the taste of victory. Wei Bai, this impassioned tone, why did the side mission also become a spirit? Side mission, my plan this time is to let you take back the power of the Bai family, whip that little man, make him kneel on the keyboard, and serve you water to wash your feet. Wei Bai, no, wait, she had racked her brains for the mission to begin with. The following side missions wouldn't force her to complete the damn mission of making Yu Xiaoyun kneel on the keyboard, serve her water, and be whipped, right? Side mission, what are you waiting for? I'm afraid you won't be able to complete it and turn this big mission into a small one. The first mission is to help you deal with the crippled male lead. It's okay, the party you just called is the enemy of the male lead, they have already rushed to deal with the male lead. Wei Bai. Fuck you, side mission, I accept your gratitude. When your man is crippled, you can take back the power in his hands. Then I'll go to sleep first. Wei Bai, sleep a cat, get up and go out. If you have the guts, let's die together. The system could finally speak, it's okay, you can do it. The host was so miserable that it couldn't bear to scold her. Wei Bai staggered and reached out to support herself against the wall, feeling that there were dark waves in front of her eyes. The sharp-tongued system was finally improved. Another vicious little bitch came to smash the side mission. Main system, what grudges do you have with me? Did I whore you in my previous life? When Wei Bai returned to the door of the private room, she cautiously poked her head out. However, he saw Yu Xiaoyun leaning against the chair with his hand supporting his chin. He was resting with his eyes closed. The man's skin was fair and delicate. It was the kind of beautiful appearance of someone who lived like a prince. His eyelashes fluttered, and he slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were hazy, and he saw the girl at the door. She looked petite and scared, as if she didn't dare to enter the door. Yu Xiaoyun's mind stirred. He lowered his finger from his chin and then waved his hand. The misty eyes of the girl at the door immediately sparkled, as if she was very happy. Yu Xiaoyun's bad mood also improved a little. Wei Bai walked in and sat beside him obediently. Yu Xiaoyun reached out and took the chopsticks. He scalded them with boiling water and then scalded the cup for her. What do you want to eat? I've asked them to serve you some. You can try whatever you like. After you're done eating, you can pack a few servings to go home. She was too harmless and cute. Although he was easily bullied, Yu Xiaoyun could suppress the urge to bully her. After all, compared to bullying her, holding her in his hands, controlling her happiness and sadness, and making her look at him with admiration, wouldn't it be more fulfilling? His feelings for her were nothing more than a pet's fondness for her. Yu Xiaoyun thought coldly, but his actions were unusually gentle. When he saw Wei Bai's gaze fall on the hairy crab, he smiled. You can't eat this thing, and it's not delicious. // You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.